Chapter 12 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 12. Of the Lamps of the Mansions. The Ambassador's Plea. Mrs. Hurstwood was not aware of any of her husband's moral defections, though she might readily have suspected his tendencies, which she well understood. She was a woman upon whose action under provocation you could never count. Hurstwood, for one, had not the slightest idea of what she would do under certain circumstances. He had never seen her thoroughly aroused. In fact, she was not a woman who would fly into a passion. She had too little faith in mankind not to know that they were erring. She was too calculating to jeopardize any advantage she might gain in the way of information by fruitless clamor. Her wrath would never wreak itself in one fell blow. She would wait and brood, studying the details and adding to them until her power might be commensurate with her desire for revenge. At the same time she would not delay to inflict any injury, big or little, which would wound the object of her revenge and still leave him uncertain as to the source of the evil. She was a cold, self-centered woman, with many a thought of her own which never found expression, not even by so much as the glint of an eye. Hurstwood felt some of this in her nature, though he did not actually perceive it. He dwelt with her in peace and some satisfaction. He did not fear her in the least. There was no cause for it. She still took a faint pride in him, which was augmented by her desire to have her social integrity maintained. She was secretly somewhat pleased by the fact that much of her husband's property was in her name, a precaution which Hurstwood had taken when his home interests were somewhat more alluring than at present. His wife had not the slightest reason to feel that anything would ever go amiss with their household, and yet the shadows which run before gave her a thought of the good of it now and then. She was in a position to become refractory with considerable advantage, and Hurstwood conducted himself circumspectly because he felt that he could not be sure of anything once she became dissatisfied. It so happened that on the night when Hurstwood, Carrie, and Drouet were in the box at McVicker's, George Jr. was in the 6th row of the parquet with the daughter of H.B. Carmichael, the third partner of a wholesale dry goods house of that city. Hurstwood did not see his son, for he sat, as was his wont, as far back as possible, leaving himself just partially visible when he bent forward to those within the first 6 rows in question. It was his wont to sit this way in every theatre, to make his personality as inconspicuous as possible where it would be no advantage to him to have it otherwise. He never moved but what, if there was any danger of his conduct being misconstrued or ill-reported, he looked carefully about him and counted the cost of every inch of conspicuity. The next morning at breakfast his son said, "I saw you, Governor, last night." "Were you at McVicker's?" said Hurstwood, with the best grace in the world. "Yes," said young George. "Who with?" "Miss Carmichael." Mrs. Hurstwood directed an inquiring glance at her husband, but could not judge from his appearance whether it was any more than a casual look into the theatre which was referred to. "How was the play?" she inquired. "Very good," returned Hurstwood, "only it's the same old thing, Rip Van Winkle." "Whom did you go with?" queried his wife, with assumed indifference. "Charlie Drouet and his wife. They are friends of Moy's, visiting here." Owing to the peculiar nature of his position, such a disclosure as this would ordinarily create no difficulty. His wife took it for granted that his situation called for certain social movements in which she might not be included. But of late he had pleaded office duty on several occasions when his wife asked for his company to any evening entertainment. He had done so in regard to the very evening in question only the morning before. "I thought you were going to be busy," she remarked very carefully. "So I was," he exclaimed. "I couldn't help the interruption, but I made up for it afterward by working until 2. This settled the discussion for the time being, but there was a residue of opinion that was not satisfactory. There was no time at which the claims of his wife could have been more unsatisfactorily pushed. For years he had been steadily modifying his matrimonial devotion, and found her company dull. Now that a new light shone upon the horizon, this older luminary paled in the west. He was satisfied to turn his face away entirely, and any call to look back was irksome. She, on the contrary, was not at all inclined to accept anything less than a complete fulfillment of the letter of their relationship, though the spirit might be wanting. "We are coming downtown this afternoon," she remarked a few days later. "I want you to come over to Kinsley's and meet Mr. Phillips and his wife. They are stopping at the Tremont, and we are going to show them around a little." After the occurrence of Wednesday he could not refuse, though the Phillips were about as uninteresting as vanity and ignorance could make them. He agreed, but it was with short grace. He was angry when he left the house. "I'll put a stop to this," he thought. "I'm not going to be bothered fooling around with visitors when I have work to do." Not long after this Mrs. Hurstwood came up with a similar proposition, only it was to a matinee this time. "My dear," he returned, "I haven't time. I'm too busy." "You find time to go with other people, though," she replied, with considerable irritation. "Nothing of the kind," he answered. "I can't avoid business relations, and that's all there is to it." "Well, never mind," she exclaimed. Her lips tightened. The feeling of mutual antagonism was increased. On the other hand, his interest in Drouet's little shop girl grew in an almost evenly balanced proportion. That young lady, under the stress of her situation and the tutelage of her new friend, changed effectively. She had the aptitude of the struggler who seeks emancipation. The glow of a more showy life was not lost upon her. She did not grow in knowledge so much as she awakened in the matter of desire. Mrs. Hale's extended harangues upon the subjects of wealth and position taught her to distinguish between degrees of wealth. Mrs. Hale loved to drive in the afternoon in the sun when it was fine, and to satisfy her soul with a sight of those mansions and lawns which she could not afford. On the north side had been erected a number of elegant mansions along what is now known as the North Shore Drive. The present lake wall of stone and granitoid was not then in place, but the road had been well laid out, the intermediate spaces of lawn were lovely to look upon, and the houses were thoroughly new and imposing. When the winter season had passed and the first fine days of the early spring appeared, Mrs. Hale secured a buggy for an afternoon and invited Carrie. They rode first through Lincoln Park and on far out towards Evanston, turning back at 4 and arriving at the north end of the shore drive at about 5 o'clock. At this time of year the days are still comparatively short, and the shadows of the evening were beginning to settle down upon the great city. Lamps were beginning to burn with that mellow radiance which seems almost watery and translucent to the eye. There was a softness in the air which speaks with an infinite delicacy of feeling to the flesh as well as to the soul. Carrie felt that it was a lovely day. She was ripened by it in spirit for many suggestions. As they drove along the smooth pavement, an occasional carriage passed. She saw one stop and the footman dismount, opening the door for a gentleman who seemed to be leisurely returning from some afternoon pleasure. Across the broad lawns, now first freshening into green, she saw lamps faintly glowing upon rich interiors. Now it was but a chair, now a table, now an ornate corner that met her eye, but it appealed to her as almost nothing else could. Such childish fancies as she had had of fairy palaces and kingly quarters now came back. She imagined that across these richly carved entrance-ways, where the globed and crystalled lamps shone upon panelled doors set with stained and designed panes of glass, was neither care nor unsatisfied desire. She was perfectly certain that here was happiness. If she could but stroll up yon broad walk, cross that rich entrance-way, which to her was of the beauty of a jewel, and sweep in grace and luxury to possession and command, oh, how quickly would sadness flee, how in an instant would the heartache end. She gazed and gazed, wondering, delighting, longing, and all the while the siren voice of the unrestful was whispering in her ear. "If we could have such a home as that," said Mrs. Hale sadly, "how delightful it would be." "And yet they do say," said Carrie, "that no one is ever happy." She had heard so much of the canting philosophy of the grapeless fox. "I notice," said Mrs. Hale, "that they all try mighty hard, though, to take their misery in a mansion." When she came to her own rooms, Carrie saw their comparative insignificance. She was not so dull but that she could perceive they were but 3 small rooms in a moderately well-furnished boarding-house. She was not contrasting it now with what she had had, but what she had so recently seen. The glow of the palatial doors was still in her eye, the roll of cushioned carriages still in her ears. What, after all, was Drouet? What was she? At her window she thought it over, rocking to and fro, and gazing out across the lamp-lit park toward the lamp-lit houses on Warren and Ashland Avenues. She was too wrought up to care to go down to eat, too pensive to do aught but rock and sing. Some old tunes crept to her lips, and as she sang them, her heart sank. She longed and longed and longed. It was now for the old cottage room in Columbia City, now the mansion upon the shore drive, now the fine dress of some lady, now the elegance of some scene. She was sad beyond measure, and yet uncertain, wishing, fancying. Finally it seemed as if all her state was one of loneliness and forsakenness, and she could scarce refrain from trembling at the lip. She hummed and hummed as the moments went by, sitting in the shadow by the window, and was therein as happy, though she did not perceive it, as she ever would be. While Carrie was still in this frame of mind, the house servant brought up the intelligence that Mr. Hurstwood was in the parlor, asking to see Mr. and Mrs. Drouet. "I guess he doesn't know that Charlie is out of town," thought Carrie. She had seen comparatively little of the manager during the winter, but had been kept constantly in mind of him by one thing and another, principally by the strong impression he had made. She was quite disturbed for the moment as to her appearance, but soon satisfied herself by the aid of the mirror, and went below. Hurstwood was in his best form, as usual. He hadn't heard that Drouet was out of town. He was but slightly affected by the intelligence, and devoted himself to the more general topics that would interest Carrie. It was surprising, the ease with which he conducted a conversation. He was like every man who has had the advantage of practice and knows he has sympathy. He knew that Carrie listened to him pleasurably, and without the least effort he fell into a train of observation which absorbed her fancy. He drew up his chair and modulated his voice to such a degree that what he said seemed wholly confidential. He confined himself almost exclusively to his observation of men and pleasures. He had been here and there. He had seen this and that. Somehow he made Carrie wish to see similar things, and all the while kept her aware of himself. She could not shut out the consciousness of his individuality and presence for a moment. He would raise his eyes slowly in smiling emphasis of something, and she was fixed by their magnetism. He would draw out with the easiest grace her approval. Once he touched her hand for emphasis, and she only smiled. He seemed to radiate an atmosphere which suffused her being. He was never dull for a minute, and seemed to make her clever. At least she brightened under his influence until all her best side was exhibited. She felt that she was more clever with him than with others. At least he seemed to find so much in her to applaud. There was not the slightest touch of patronage. Drouet was full of it. There had been something so personal, so subtle in each meeting between them, both when Drouet was present and when he was absent, that Carrie could not speak of it without feeling a sense of difficulty. She was no talker. She could never arrange her thoughts in fluent order. It was always a matter of feeling with her, strong and deep. Each time there had been no sentence of importance which she could relate, and as for the glances and sensations, what woman would reveal them? Such things had never been between her and Drouet. As a matter of fact, they could never be. She had been dominated by distress and the enthusiastic forces of relief which Drouet represented at an opportune moment when she yielded to him. Now she was persuaded by secret current feelings which Drouet had never understood. Hurstwood's glance was as effective as the spoken words of a lover, and more. They called for no immediate decision, and could not be answered. People in general attach too much importance to words. They are under the illusion that talking effects great results. As a matter of fact, words are, as a rule, the shallowest portion of all the argument. They but dimly represent the great surging feelings and desires which lie behind. When the distraction of the tongue is removed, the heart listens. In this conversation she heard, instead of his words, the voices of the things which he represented. How suave was the counsel of his appearance! How feelingly did his superior state speak for itself! The growing desire he felt for her lay upon her spirit as a gentle hand. She did not need to tremble at all, because it was invisible. She did not need to worry over what other people would say, what she herself would say, because it had no tangibility. She was being pleaded with, persuaded, led into denying old rights and assuming new ones, and yet there were no words to prove it. Such conversation as was indulged in held the same relationship to the actual mental enactments of the twain that the low music of the orchestra does to the dramatic incident which it is used to cover. "Have you ever seen the houses along the lake shore on the north side?" asked Hurstwood. "Why, I was just over there this afternoon. Mrs. Hale and I. Aren't they beautiful?" "They're very fine," he answered. "Oh, me," said Carrie pensively. "I wish I could live in such a place." "You're not happy," said Hurstwood slowly, after a pause. He had raised his eyes solemnly, and was looking into her own. He assumed that he had struck a deep chord. Now was a slight chance to say a word in his own behalf. He leaned over quietly, and continued his steady gaze. He felt the critical character of the period. She endeavoured to stir, but it was useless. The whole strength of the man's nature was working. He had a good cause to urge him on. He looked, and the longer the situation lasted, the more difficult it became. The little shop girl was getting into deep water. She was letting her few supports float away from her. "Oh," she said at last, "you mustn't look at me like that." "I can't help it," he answered. She relaxed a little, and let the situation endure, giving him strength. "You are not satisfied with life, are you?" "No," she answered weakly. He saw that he was the master of the situation. He felt it. He reached over and touched her hand. "You mustn't!" she exclaimed, jumping up. "I didn't intend to," he answered easily. She did not run away as she might have done. She did not terminate the interview, but he drifted off into a pleasant field of thought with the readiest grace. Not long after he rose to go, and she felt that he was in power. "You mustn't feel bad," he said kindly. "Things will straighten out in the course of time." She made no answer because she could think of nothing to say. "We're good friends, aren't we?" he said, extending his hand. "Yes," she answered. "Not a word, then, until I see you again." He retained a hold of her hand. "I can't promise," she said doubtfully. "You must be more generous than that," he said, in such a simple way that she was touched. "Let's not talk about it any more," she returned. "All right," he said, brightening. He went down the steps and into his cab. Carrie closed the door and ascended into her room. She undid her broad lace collar before the mirror, and unfastened her pretty alligator belt which she had recently bought. "I'm getting terrible," she said, honestly affected by a feeling of trouble and shame. "I don't seem to do anything right." She unloosed her hair after a time, and let it hang in loose brown waves. Her mind was going over the events of the evening. "I don't know," she murmured at last, "what I can do." "Well," said Hurstwood as he drove away, "she likes me all right. That I know." The aroused manager whistled merrily for a good 4 miles to his office, an old melody that he had not recalled for 15 years. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 13. His Credentials Accepted. A Babel of Tongues. It was not quite 2 days after the scene between Carrie and Hurstwood in the Ogden Place parlor before he again put in his appearance. He had been thinking almost uninterruptedly of her. Her leniency had, in a way, inflamed his regard. He felt that he must succeed with her, and that speedily. The reason for his interest, not to say fascination, was deeper than mere desire. It was a flowering out of feelings which had been withering in dry and almost barren soil for many years. It is probable that Carrie represented a better order of woman than had ever attracted him before. He had had no love affair since that which culminated in his marriage, and since then time and the world had taught him how raw and erroneous was his original judgment. Whenever he thought of it, he told himself that, if he had it to do over again, he would never marry such a woman. At the same time, his experience with women in general had lessened his respect for the sex. He maintained a cynical attitude, well grounded on numerous experiences. Such women as he had known were nearly of one type: selfish, ignorant, flashy. The wives of his friends were not inspiring to look upon. His own wife had developed a cold, commonplace nature which to him was anything but pleasing. What he knew of that underworld where grovel the beast men of society, and he knew a great deal, had hardened his nature. He looked upon most women with suspicion, a single eye to the utility of beauty and dress. He followed them with a keen, suggestive glance. At the same time he was not so dull but that a good woman commanded his respect. Personally, he did not attempt to analyze the marvel of a saintly woman. He would take off his hat, and would silence the light-tongued and the vicious in her presence. Much as an Irish keeper of a Bowery Hall would humble himself before a Sister of Mercy, and pay toll to charity with a willing and reverent hand, but he would not think much upon the question of why he did so. A man in his situation who comes, after a long round of worthless or hardening experiences, upon a young, unsophisticated, innocent soul, is apt either to hold aloof out of a sense of his own remoteness, or to draw near and become fascinated and elated by his discovery. It is only by a roundabout process that such men ever do draw near such a girl. They have no method, no understanding of how to ingratiate themselves in youthful favor, save when they find virtue in the toils. If, unfortunately, the fly has got caught in the net, the spider can come forth and talk business upon its own terms. So when maidenhood has wandered into the moil of the city, when it is brought within the circle of the rounder and the rue, even though it may be at the outermost rim, they can come forth and use their alluring arts. Hurstwood had gone at Drouet's invitation to meet a new baggage of fine clothes and pretty features. He entered, expecting to indulge in an evening of lightsome frolic, and then lose track of the newcomer forever. Instead, he found a woman whose youth and beauty attracted him. In the mild light of Carrie's eyes was nothing of the calculation of the mistress. In the diffident manner was nothing of the art of the courtesan. He saw at once that a mistake had been made, that some difficult conditions had pushed this troubled creature into his presence, and his interest was enlisted. Here sympathy sprang to the rescue, but it was not unmixed with selfishness. He wanted to win Carrie because he thought her fate mingled with his was better than if it were united with Drouet's. He envied the drummer his conquest, as he had never envied any man in all the course of his experience. Carrie was certainly better than this man, as she was superior, mentally, to Drouet. She came fresh from the air of the village, the light of the country still in her eye. Here was neither guile nor rapacity. There were slight inherited traits of both in her, but they were rudimentary. She was too full of wonder and desire to be greedy. She still looked about her upon the maze of the city without understanding. Hurstwood felt the bloom and the youth. He picked her as he would the fresh fruit of a tree. He felt as fresh in her presence as one who is taken out of the flash of summer to the first cool breath of spring. Carrie, left alone since the scene in question, and having no one with whom to counsel, had at first wandered from one strange mental conclusion to another, until at last, tired out, she gave it up. She owed something to Drouet, she thought. It did not seem more than yesterday that he had aided her when she was worried and distressed. She had the kindliest feelings for him in every way. She gave him credit for his good looks, his generous feelings, and even, in fact, failed to recollect his egotism when he was absent. But she could not feel any binding influence keeping her for him against all others. In fact, such a thought had never had any grounding even in Drouet's desires. The truth is that this goodly drummer carried the doom of all enduring relationships in his own lightsome manner and unstable fancy. He went merrily on, assured that he was alluring all, that affection followed tenderly in his wake, that things would endure unchangingly for his pleasure. When he missed some old face or found some door finally shut to him, it did not grieve him deeply. He was too young, too successful. He would remain thus young in spirit until he was dead. As for Hurstwood, he was alive with thoughts and feelings concerning Carrie. He had no definite plans regarding her, but he was determined to make her confess an affection for him. He thought he saw in her drooping eye, her unstable glance, her wavering manner, the symptoms of a budding passion. He wanted to stand near her and make her lay her hand in his. He wanted to find out what her next step would be, what the next sign of feeling for him would be. Such anxiety and enthusiasm had not affected him for years. He was a youth again in feeling, a cavalier in action. In his position, opportunity for taking his evenings out was excellent. He was a most faithful worker in general, and a man who commanded the confidence of his employers in so far as the distribution of his time was concerned. He could take such hours off as he chose, for it was well known that he fulfilled his managerial duties successfully, whatever time he might take. His grace, tact, and ornate appearance gave the place an air which was most essential, while at the same time his long experience made him an excellent judge of its stock necessities. Bartenders and assistants might come and go, singly or in groups, but so long as he was present, the host of old-time customers would barely notice the change. He gave the place the atmosphere to which they were used. Consequently, he arranged his hours very much to suit himself, taking now an afternoon, now an evening, but invariably returning between 11 and 12 to witness the last hour or two of the day's business and look after the closing details. "You see that things are safe and all the employees are out when you go home, George," Moy had once remarked to him, and he never once, in all the period of his long service, neglected to do this. Neither of the owners had for years been in the resort after 5 in the afternoon, and yet their manager as faithfully fulfilled this request as if they had been there regularly to observe. On this Friday afternoon, scarcely 2 days after his previous visit, he made up his mind to see Carrie. He would not stay away longer. "Evans," he said, addressing the head barkeeper, "if anyone calls, I will be back between 4 and 5. He hurried to Madison Street and boarded a horse car, which carried him to Ogden Place in half an hour. Carrie had thought of going for a walk, and had put on a light grey woolen dress with a jaunty double-breasted jacket. She had out her hat and gloves, and was fastening a white lace tie about her throat when the housemaid brought up the information that Mr. Hurstwood wished to see her. She started slightly at the announcement, but told the girl to say that she would come down in a moment, and proceeded to hasten her dressing. Carrie could not have told herself at this moment whether she was glad or sorry that the impressive manager was awaiting her presence. She was slightly flurried and tingling in the cheeks, but it was more nervousness than either fear or favor. She did not try to conjecture what the drift of the conversation would be. She only felt that she must be careful, and that Hurstwood had an indefinable fascination for her. Then she gave her tie its last touch with her fingers and went below. The deep-feeling manager was himself a little strained in the nerves by the thorough consciousness of his mission. He felt that he must make a strong play on this occasion, but now that the hour was come, and he heard Carrie's feet upon the stair, his nerve failed him. He sank a little in determination, for he was not so sure, after all, what her opinion might be. When she entered the room, however, her appearance gave him courage. She looked simple and charming enough to strengthen the daring of any lover. Her apparent nervousness dispelled his own. "How are you?" he said easily. "I could not resist the temptation to come out this afternoon. It was so pleasant." "Yes," said Carrie, halting before him. "I was just preparing to go for a walk myself." "Oh, were you?" he said. "Supposing, then, you get your hat and we both go." They crossed the park and went along Washington Boulevard, beautiful with its broad macadamized road and large frame houses set back from the sidewalks. It was a street where many of the more prosperous residents of the West Side lived, and Hurstwood could not help feeling nervous over the publicity of it. They had gone but a few blocks when a livery stable sign in one of the side streets solved the difficulty for him. He would take her to drive along the new boulevard. The boulevard at that time was little more than a country road. The part he intended showing her was much farther out on this same west side, where there was scarcely a house. It connected Douglas Park with Washington or South Park, and was nothing more than a neatly made road running due south for some 5 miles over an open grassy prairie, and then due east over the same kind of prairie for the same distance. There was not a house to be encountered anywhere along the larger part of the route, and any conversation would be pleasantly free of interruption. At the stable he picked a gentle horse, and they were soon out of range of either public observation or hearing. "Can you drive?" he asked after a time. "I never tried," said Carrie. He put the reins in her hand and folded his arms. "You see, there's nothing much to it," he said smilingly. "Not when you have a gentle horse," said Carrie. "You can handle a horse as well as anyone, after a little practice," he added encouragingly. He had been looking for some time for a break in the conversation when he could give it a serious turn. Once or twice he had held his peace, hoping that in silence her thoughts would take the color of his own, but she had lightly continued the subject. Presently, however, his silence controlled the situation. The drift of his thoughts began to tell. He gazed fixedly at nothing in particular, as if he were thinking of something which concerned her not at all. His thoughts, however, spoke for themselves. She was very much aware that a climax was pending. "Do you know," he said, "I have spent the happiest evenings in years since I've known you?" "Have you?" she said, with assumed airiness, but still excited by the conviction which the tone of his voice carried. "I was going to tell you the other evening," he said, "but somehow the opportunity slipped away." Carrie was listening without attempting to reply. She could think of nothing worth while to say, despite all the ideas concerning Wright which had troubled her vaguely since she had last seen him. She was now influenced again strongly in his favor. "I came out here today," he went on solemnly, "to tell you just how I feel, to see if you wouldn't listen to me." Hurstwood was something of a romanticist after his kind. He was capable of strong feelings, often poetic ones, and under a stress of desire, such as the present, he waxed eloquent. That is, his feelings and his voice were colored with that seeming repression and pathos which is the essence of eloquence. "You know," he said, putting his hand on her arm, and keeping a strange silence while he formulated words, "that I love you?" Carrie did not stir at the words. She was bound up completely in the man's atmosphere. He would have church-like silence in order to express his feelings, and she kept it. She did not move her eyes from the flat, open scene before her. Hurstwood waited for a few moments, and then repeated the words. "You must not say that," she said weakly. Her words were not convincing at all. They were the result of a feeble thought that something ought to be said. He paid no attention to them whatever. "Carrie," he said, using her first name with sympathetic familiarity, "I want you to love me. You don't know how much I need someone to waste a little affection on me. I am practically alone. There is nothing in my life that is pleasant or delightful. It's all work and worry with people who are nothing to me." As he said this, Hurstwood really imagined that his state was pitiful. He had the ability to get off at a distance and view himself objectively, of seeing what he wanted to see in the things that made up his existence. Now, as he spoke, his voice trembled with that peculiar vibration which is the result of tensity. It went ringing home to his companion's heart. "Why, I should think," she said, turning upon him large eyes which were full of sympathy and feeling, "that you would be very happy. You know so much of the world." "That is it," he said, his voice dropping to a soft minor. "I know too much of the world." It was an important thing to her to hear one so well positioned and powerful speaking in this manner. She could not help feeling the strangeness of her situation. How was it that, in so little a while, the narrow life of the country had fallen from her as a garment, and the city, with all its mystery, taken its place? Here was this greatest mystery, the man of money and affairs sitting beside her, appealing to her. Behold, he had ease and comfort. His strength was great, his position high, his clothing rich, and yet he was appealing to her. She could formulate no thought which would be just and right. She troubled herself no more upon the matter. She only basked in the warmth of his feeling, which was as a grateful blaze to one who is cold. Hurstwood glowed with his own intensity, and the heat of his passion was already melting the wax of his companion's scruples. "You think," he said, "I am happy, that I ought not to complain? If you were to meet all day with people who care absolutely nothing about you, if you went day after day to a place where there was nothing but show and indifference, if there was not one person in all those you knew to whom you could appeal for sympathy or talk to with pleasure, perhaps you would be unhappy too." He was striking a chord now which found sympathetic response in her own situation. She knew what it was to meet with people who were indifferent, to walk alone amid so many who cared absolutely nothing about you. Had not she? Was not she at this very moment quite alone? Who was there among all whom she knew to whom she could appeal for sympathy? Not one. She was left to herself to brood and wonder. "I could be content," went on Hurstwood, "if I had you to love me, if I had you to go to, you for a companion. As it is, I simply move about from place to place without any satisfaction. Time hangs heavily on my hands. Before you came I did nothing but idle and drift into anything that offered itself. Since you came, well, I've had you to think about." The old delusion that here was someone who needed her aid began to grow in Carrie's mind. She truly pitied this sad, lonely figure. To think that all his fine state should be so barren for want of her, that he needed to make such an appeal when she herself was lonely and without anchor. Surely this was too bad. "I am not very bad," he said apologetically, as if he owed it to her to explain on this score. "You think, probably, that I roam around and get into all sorts of evil. I have been rather reckless, but I could easily come out of that. I need you to draw me back, if my life ever amounts to anything." Carrie looked at him with the tenderness which virtue ever feels in its hope of reclaiming vice. How could such a man need reclaiming? His errors, what were they, that she could correct? Small they must be, where all was so fine. At worst they were gilded affairs, and with what leniency are gilded errors viewed? He put himself in such a lonely light that she was deeply moved. "Is it that way?" she mused. He slipped his arm about her waist, and she could not find the heart to draw away. With his free hand he seized upon her fingers. A breath of soft spring wind went bounding over the road, rolling some brown twigs of the previous autumn before it. The horse paced leisurely on, unguided. "Tell me," he said softly, "that you love me." Her eyes fell consciously. "Own to it, dear," he said feelingly. "You do, don't you?" She made no answer, but he felt his victory. "Tell me," he said richly, drawing her so close that their lips were near together. He pressed her hand warmly, and then released it to touch her cheek. "You do?" he said, pressing his lips to her own. For answer, her lips replied. "Now," he said joyously, his fine eyes ablaze, "you're my own girl, aren't you?" By way of further conclusion, her head lay softly upon his shoulder. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 14. With eyes and not seeing, one influence wanes. Carrie in her rooms that evening was in a fine glow, physically and mentally. She was deeply rejoicing in her affection for Hurstwood and his love, and looked forward with fine fancy to their next meeting Sunday night. They had agreed, without any feeling of enforced secrecy, that she should come downtown and meet him, though, after all, the need of it was the cause. Mrs. Hale, from her upper window, saw her come in. She thought to herself, she goes riding with another man when her husband is out of the city. He had better keep an eye on her. The truth is, Mrs. Hale was not the only one who had a thought on this score. The housemaid who had welcomed Hurstwood had her opinion also. She had no particular regard for Carrie, whom she took to be cold and disagreeable. At the same time, she had a fancy for the merry and easy-mannered Drouet, who threw her a pleasant remark now and then, and in other ways extended her the evidence of that regard which he had for all members of the sex. Hurstwood was more reserved and critical in his manner. He did not appeal to this bodice functionary in the same pleasant way. She wondered that he came so frequently, that Mrs. Drouet should go out with him this afternoon when Mr. Drouet was absent. She gave vent to her opinions in the kitchen where the cook was. As a result, a hum of gossip was set going which moved about the house in that secret manner common to gossip. Carrie, now that she had yielded sufficiently to Hurstwood to confess her affection, no longer troubled about her attitude towards him. Temporarily she gave little thought to Drouet, thinking only of the dignity and grace of her lover and of his consuming affection for her. On the first evening she did little but go over the details of the afternoon. It was the first time her sympathies had ever been thoroughly aroused, and they threw a new light on her character. She had some power of initiative, latent before, which now began to exert itself. She looked more practically upon her state, and began to see glimmerings of a way out. Hurstwood seemed a drag in the direction of honor. Her feelings were exceedingly credible, in that they constructed out of these recent developments something which conquered freedom from dishonor. She had no idea what Hurstwood's next word would be. She only took his affection to be a fine thing, and appended better, more generous results accordingly. As yet, Hurstwood had only a thought of pleasure without responsibility. He did not feel that he was doing anything to complicate his life. His position was secure. His home life, if not satisfactory, was at least undisturbed. His personal liberty rather untrammeled. Carrie's love added only so much added pleasure. He would enjoy this new gift over and above his ordinary allowance of pleasure. He would be happy with her, and his own affairs would go on as they had, undisturbed. On Sunday evening, Carrie dined with him at a place he had selected in East Adams Street, and thereafter they took a cab to what was then a pleasant evening resort out on Cottage Grove Avenue near 39th Street. In the process of his declaration he soon realized that Carrie took his love upon a higher basis than he had anticipated. She kept him at a distance in a rather earnest way, and submitted only to those tender tokens of affection which better become the inexperienced lover. Hurstwood saw that she was not to be possessed for the asking, and deferred pressing his suit too warmly. Since he feigned to believe in her married state, he found that he had to carry out the part. His triumph, he saw, was still at a little distance. How far he could not guess. They were returning to Ogden Place in the cab when he asked, "Will I see you again?" "I don't know," she answered, wondering herself. "Why not come down to the fair?" he suggested, "next Tuesday?" She shook her head. "Not so soon," she answered. "I'll tell you what I'll do," he said. "I'll write you, care of this West Side Post Office. Could you call next Tuesday?" Carrie assented. The cab stopped one door out of the way according to his call. "Good night," he whispered as the cab rolled away. Unfortunately for the smooth progression of this affair, Drouet returned. Hurstwood was sitting in his imposing little office the next afternoon when he saw Drouet enter. "Why, hello, Charles," he called affably. "Back again?" "Yes," smiled Drouet, approaching and looking in at the door. Hurstwood arose. "Well," he said, looking the drummer over, "rosy as ever, eh?" They began talking of the people they knew and things that had happened. "Been home yet?" finally asked Hurstwood. "No, I am going, though," said Drouet. "I remembered the little girl out there," said Hurstwood, "and called once. Thought you wouldn't want her left quite alone." "Right you are," agreed Drouet. "How is she?" "Very well," said Hurstwood. "Rather anxious about you, though. You'd better go out now and cheer her up." "I will," said Drouet smilingly. "Like to have you both come down and go to the show with me Wednesday," concluded Hurstwood at parting. "Thanks, old man," said his friend. "I'll see what the girl says and let you know." They separated in the most cordial manner. "That's a nice fellow," Drouet thought to himself, as he turned the corner towards Madison. "Drouet is a good fellow," Hurstwood thought to himself as he went back into his office, "but he's no man for Carrie." The thought of the latter turned his mind into a most pleasant vein, and he wondered how he would get ahead of the drummer. When Drouet entered Carrie's presence, he caught her in his arms as usual, but she responded to his kiss with a tremor of opposition. "Well," he said, "I had a great trip." "Did you? How did you come out with that lacrosse man you were telling me about?" "Oh, fine. Sold him a complete line. There was another fellow there representing Bernstein, a regular hook-nosed sheeny, but he wasn't in it. I made him look all nothing at all." As he undid his collar and unfastened his studs, preparatory to washing his face and changing his clothes, he dilated upon his trip. Carrie could not help listening with amusement to his animated descriptions. "I tell you," he said, "I surprised the people at the office. I've sold more goods this last quarter than any other man of our house on the road. I sold $3,000 worth in lacrosse." He plunged his face into a basin of water, and puffed and blew as he rubbed his neck and ears with his hands, while Carrie gazed upon him with mingled thoughts of recollection and present judgment. He was still wiping his face when he continued. "I'm going to strike for a raise in June. They can afford to pay it, as much business as I turn in. I'll get it, too, don't you forget." "I hope you do," said Carrie. "And then if that little real estate deal I've got on goes through, we'll get married," he said with a great show of earnestness, the while he took his place before the mirror and began brushing his hair. "I don't believe you ever intend to marry me, Charlie," Carrie said ruefully. The recent protestations of Hurstwood had given her courage to say this. "Oh, yes, I do. Of course I do. What put that into your head?" He had stopped his trifling before the mirror now and crossed over to her. For the first time Carrie felt as if she must move away from him. "But you've been saying that so long," she said, looking with her pretty face upturned into his. "Well, and I mean it, too. But it takes money to live as I want to. Now, when I get this increase, I can come pretty near fixing things all right, and I'll do it. Now don't you worry, girlie." He patted her reassuringly upon the shoulder, but Carrie felt how really futile had been her hopes. She could clearly see that this easy-going soul intended no move in her behalf. He was simply letting things drift, because he preferred the free round of his present state to any legal trammellings. In contrast, Hurstwood appeared strong and sincere. He had no easy manner of putting her off. He sympathized with her, and showed her what her true value was. He needed her, while Drouet did not care. "Oh, no," she said remorsefully, her tone reflecting some of her own success and more of her helplessness. "You never will." "Well, you wait a little while and see," he concluded. "I'll marry you all right." Carrie looked at him and felt justified. She was looking for something which would calm her conscience, and here it was, a light, airy disregard of her claims upon his justice. He had faithfully promised to marry her, and this was the way he fulfilled his promise. "Say," he said after he had, as he thought, pleasantly disposed of the marriage question, "I saw Hurstwood today, and he wants us to go to the theatre with him." Carrie started at the name, but recovered quickly enough to avoid notice. "When?" she asked with assumed indifference. "Wednesday. We'll go, won't we?" "If you think so," she answered, her manner being so enforcedly reserved as to excite suspicion. Drouet noticed something, but he thought it was due to her feelings concerning their talk about marriage. "He called once, he said." "Yes," said Carrie. "He was out here Sunday evening." "Was he?" said Drouet. "I thought from what he said that he had called a week or so ago." "So he did," answered Carrie, who was wholly unaware of what conversation her lovers might have held. She was all at sea mentally, and fearful of some entanglement which might ensue from what she would answer. "Oh, then he called twice?" said Drouet, the first shade of misunderstanding showing in his face. "Yes," said Carrie innocently, feeling now that Hurstwood must have mentioned but one call. Drouet imagined that he must have misunderstood his friend. He did not attach particular importance to the information, after all. "What did he have to say?" he queried, with slightly increasing curiosity. "He said he came because he thought I might be lonely. You hadn't been in there so long he wondered what had become of you." "George is a fine fellow," said Drouet, rather gratified by his conception of the manager's interest. "Come on, and we'll go out to dinner." When Hurstwood saw that Drouet was back, he wrote at once to Carrie, saying, "I told him I called on you, dearest, when he was away. I did not say how often, but he probably thought once. Let me know of anything you may have said. Answer by special messenger when you get this. And, darling, I must see you. Let me know if you can't meet me at Jackson and Throop Streets Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. I want to speak with you before we meet at the theatre." Carrie received this Tuesday morning, when she called at the West Side branch of the post office, and answered at once. "I said you called twice," she wrote. "He didn't seem to mind. I will try and be at Throop Street if nothing interferes. I seem to be getting very bad. It's wrong to act as I do, I know." Hurstwood, when he met her as agreed, reassured her on this score. "You mustn't worry, sweetheart," he said. "Just as soon as he goes on the road again we will arrange something. We'll fix it so you won't have to deceive anyone." Carrie imagined that he would marry her at once, though he had not directly said so, and her spirits rose. She proposed to make the best of the situation until Drouet left again. "Don't show any more interest in me than you ever have," Hurstwood counselled concerning the evening at the theatre. "You mustn't look at me steadily then," she answered, mindful of the power of his eyes. "I won't," he said, squeezing her hand at parting and giving the glance she had just cautioned against. "There," she said playfully, pointing a finger at him. "The show hasn't begun yet," he returned. He watched her walk from him with tender solicitation. Such youth and prettiness reacted upon him more subtly than wine. At the theatre things passed as they had in Hurstwood's favour. If he had been pleasing to Carrie before, how much more so was he now? His grace was more permeating because it found a readier medium. Carrie watched his every movement with pleasure. She almost forgot poor Drouet, who babbled on as if he were the host. Hurstwood was too clever to give the slightest indication of a change. He paid, if anything, more attention to his old friend than usual, and yet in no way held him up to that subtle ridicule which a lover in favour may so secretly practise before the mistress of his heart. If anything, he felt the injustice of the game as it stood, and was not cheap enough to add to it the slightest mental taunt. Only the play produced an ironical situation, and this was due to Drouet alone. The scene was one in the Covenant, in which the wife listened to the seductive voice of a lover in the absence of her husband. "Served him right," said Drouet afterwards, even in view of her keen expiation of her error. "I haven't any pity for a man who would be such a chump as that." "Well, you never can tell," returned Hurstwood gently. "He probably thought he was right." "Well, a man ought to be more attentive than that to his wife if he wants to keep her." They had come out of the lobby, and made their way through the showy crush about the entrance-way. "Say, mister," said a voice at Hurstwood's side, "would you mind giving me the price of a bed?" Hurstwood was interestedly remarking to Carrie, "Honest to God, mister, I'm without a place to sleep." The plea was that of a gaunt-faced man of about 30, who looked the picture of privation and wretchedness. Drouet was the first to see. He handed over a dime with an upwelling feeling of pity in his heart. Hurstwood scarcely noticed the incident. Carrie quickly forgot. End of chapter 14.
Chapter 15 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Voice of Andrea. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 15. The irk of the old ties, the magic of youth. The complete ignoring by Hurstwood of his own home came with the growth of his affection for Carrie. His actions, and all that related to his family, were of the most perfunctory kind. He sat at breakfast with his wife and children, absorbed in his own fancies, which reached far without the realm of their interests. He read his paper, which was heightened in interest by the shallowness of the themes discussed by his son and daughter. Between him and his wife ran a river of indifference. Now that Carrie had come, he was in a fair way to be blissful again. There was delight in going downtown evenings. When he walked forth in the short days, the street lamps had a merry twinkle. He began to experience the almost forgotten feeling which hastens the lover's feet. When he looked at his fine clothes, he saw them with her eyes, and her eyes were young. When in the flush of such feelings he heard his wife's voice, when the insistent demands of matrimony recalled him from dreams to a stale practice, how it grated! He then knew that this was a chain which bound his feet. "George," said Mrs. Hurstwood, in that tone which had long since come to be associated in his mind with demands, "we want you to get us a season ticket to the races." "Do you want to go to all of them?" he said, with a rising inflection. "Yes," she answered. The races in question were soon to open at Washington Park on the south side, and were considered quite society affairs among those who did not affect religious rectitude and conservatism. Mrs. Hurstwood had never asked for a whole season ticket before, but this year certain considerations decided her to get a box. For one thing, one of her neighbors, a certain Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay, who were possessors of money made out of the coal business, had done so. In the next place, her favorite physician, Dr. Beale, a gentleman inclined to horses and betting, had talked with her concerning his intention to enter a 2-year-old in the Derby. In the third place, she wished to exhibit Jessica, who was gaining in maturity and beauty, and whom she'd hoped to marry to a man of means. Her own desire to be about in such things and parade among her acquaintances and the common throng were as much an incentive as anything. Hurstwood thought over the proposition a few moments without answering. They were in the sitting room on the second floor waiting for supper. It was the evening of his engagement with Carrie and Drouet to see The Covenant, which had brought him home to make certain alterations in his dress. "You're sure separate tickets won't do as well?" he asked, hesitating to say anything more rugged. "No," she replied impatiently. "Well," he said, taking offense at her manner, "you needn't get mad about it. I'm just asking you." "I'm not mad," she snapped. "I'm merely asking you for a season ticket." "And I'm telling you," he returned, fixing a clear, steady eye on her, "that it's no easy thing to get. I'm not sure whether the manager will give it to me." He had been thinking all the time of his pull with the racetrack magnates. "We can buy it then," she exclaimed sharply. "You talk easy," he said. "A season family ticket costs $150. "I'll not argue with you," she replied with determination. "I want the ticket, and that's all there is to it." She had risen and now walked angrily out of the room. "Well, you get it then," he said grimly, though in a modified tone of voice. As usual, the table was one short that evening. The next morning he had cooled down considerably, and later the ticket was duly secured, though it did not heal matters. He did not mind giving his family a fair share of all that he earned, but he did not like to be forced to provide against his will. "Did you know, Mother," said Jessica one day, "the Spencers are getting ready to go away?" "No. Where, I wonder?" "Europe," said Jessica. "I met Georgine yesterday, and she told me. She just put on more airs about it." "Did she say when?" "Monday, I think. They'll get a notice in the papers again. They always do." "Never mind," said Mrs. Hurstwood consolingly. "We'll go one of these days." Hurstwood moved his eyes over the papers slowly, but said nothing. "We sail for Liverpool from New York," Jessica exclaimed, mocking her acquaintance. "Expect to see most of the summer in France. Vain thing, as if it was anything to go to Europe." "It must be if you envy her so much," put in Hurstwood. It grated upon him to see the feeling his daughter displayed. "Don't worry over them, my dear," said Mrs. Hurstwood. "Did George get off?" asked Jessica of her mother another day, thus revealing something that Hurstwood had heard nothing about. "Where is he gone?" he asked, looking up. He had never before been kept in ignorance concerning departures. "He was going to Wheaton," said Jessica, not noticing the slight put upon her father. "What's out there?" he asked, secretly irritated and chagrined to think that he should be made to pump for information in this manner. "A tennis match," said Jessica. "He didn't say anything to me," Hurstwood concluded, finding it difficult to refrain from a bitter tone. "I guess he must have forgotten," exclaimed his wife blandly. In the past, he had always commanded a certain amount of respect, which was a compound of appreciation and awe, the familiarity which in part still existed between himself and his daughter he had courted. As it was, it did not go beyond the light assumption of words. The tone was always modest. Whatever had been, however, had lacked affection, and now he saw that he was losing track of their doings. His knowledge was no longer intimate. He sometimes saw them at the table, and sometimes did not. He heard of their doings occasionally, more often not. Some days he found that he was all at sea as to what they were talking about, things they had arranged to do, or that they had done in his absence. More affecting was the feeling that there were little things going on of which he no longer heard. Jessica was beginning to feel that her affairs were her own. George Jr. flourished about as if he were a man entirely, and must needs have private matters. All this Hurstwood could see, and it left a trace of feeling, for he was used to being considered, in his official position at least, and felt that his importance should not begin to wane here. To darken it all, he saw the same indifference and independence growing in his wife, while he looked on and paid the bills. He told himself with the thought, however, that, after all, he was not without affection. Things might go as they would at his house, but he had Carrie outside of it. With his mind's eye, he looked into her comfortable room in Ogden Place, where he had spent several such delightful evenings, and thought how charming it would be when Drouet was disposed of entirely, and she was waiting evenings in cozy little quarters for him. that no cause would come up whereby Drouet would be led to inform Carrie concerning his married state. He felt hopeful. Things were going so smoothly that he believed they would not change. Shortly now, he would persuade Carrie, and all would be satisfactory. The day after their theater visit, he began writing her regularly, a letter every morning, and begging her to do as much for him. He was not literary by any means, but experience of the world and his growing affection gave him somewhat of a style. This he exercised at his office desk with perfect deliberation. He purchased a box of delicately colored and scented writing paper in monogram, which he kept locked in one of the drawers. His friends now wondered at the cleric and very official-looking nature of his position. The 5 bartenders viewed with respect the duties which would call a man to do so much desk work and penmanship. Hurstwood surprised himself with his fluency. By the natural law which governs all effort, what he wrote reacted upon him. He began to feel those subtleties which he could find words to express. With every expression came increased conception. Those inmost breathings which there found words took bolt upon him. He thought Carrie were worthy of all the affection he could there express. Carrie was indeed worth loving, if ever youth and grace are to command that token of acknowledgment from life in their bloom. Experience had not yet taken away that freshness of the spirit which is the charm of the body. Her soft eyes contained in their liquid luster no suggestion of the knowledge of disappointment. She had been troubled in a way by doubt and longing, but these had made no deeper impression than could be traced in a certain open wistfulness of glance and speech. The mouth had the expression at times, in talking and in repose, of one who might be upon the verge of tears. It was not that grief was thus ever present. The pronunciation of certain syllables gave her lips this peculiarity of formation, a formation as suggestive and moving as pathos itself. There was nothing bold in her manner. Life had not taught her domination, superciliousness of grace, which is the lordly power of some women. Her longing for consideration was not sufficiently powerful to move her to demand it. Even now she lacked self-assurance. But there was that in what she had already experienced which left her a little less than timid. She wanted pleasure. She wanted position. And yet she was confused as to what these things might be. Every hour the kaleidoscope of human affairs threw a new luster upon something, and therewith it became for her the desired, the all. Another shift of the box, and some other had become the beautiful, the perfect. On her spiritual side also, she was rich in feeling, as such a nature well might be. Sorrow in her was aroused by many a spectacle, an uncritical upwelling of grief for the weak and the helpless. She was constantly pained by the sight of the white-faced, ragged men who slopped desperately by her in a sort of wretched mental stupor. The poorly clad girls who went blowing by her window evenings, hurrying home from some sort of shops of the West Side. She pitied from the depths of her heart. She would stand and bite her lips as they passed, shaking her little head and wondering. They had so little, she thought. It was so sad to be ragged and poor. The hang of faded clothes pained her eyes. And they have to work so hard, was her only comment. On the street sometimes she would see men working, Irishmen with picks, coal heavers with great loads to shovel, Americans busy about some work which was a mere matter of strength, and they touched her fancy. Toil, now that she was free of it, seemed even a more desolate thing than when she was part of it. She saw it through a mist of fancy, a pale, somber half-light, which was the essence of poetic feeling. Her old father, in his flour-dusted miller's suit, sometimes returned to her in a memory, revived by a face in a window. A shoemaker pegging at his last. A blastman seen through a narrow window in some basement where iron was being melted. A bench worker seen high aloft in some window, his coat off, his sleeves rolled up. These took her back in fancy to the details of the mill. She felt, though she seldom expressed them, sad thoughts upon this score. Her sympathies were ever with that underworld of toil from which she had so recently sprung, and which she best understood. Though Hurstwood did not know it, he was dealing with one of those feelings, were as tender and as delicate as this. He did not know, but it was this in her, after all, which attracted him. He never attempted to analyze the nature of his affection. It was sufficient that there was tenderness in her eye, weakness in her manner, good nature and hope in her thoughts. He drew near this lily, which had sucked its waxen beauty and perfume from below a depth of waters which he had never penetrated, and out of ooze and mould which he could not understand. He drew near because it was waxen and fresh. It lightened his feelings for him. It made the morning worthwhile. In a material way, she was considerably improved. Her awkwardness had all but passed, leaving, if anything, a quaint residue which was as pleasing as perfect grace. Her little shoes now fitted her smartly and had high heels. She had learned much about laces and those little neck pieces which add so much to a woman's appearance. Her form had filled out until it was admirably plump and well-rounded. Hurstwood wrote her one morning, asking her to meet him in Jefferson Park, Monroe Street. He did not consider it policy to call any more, even when Dora was at home. The next afternoon he was in the pretty little park by one, and had found a rustic bench beneath the green leaves of a lilac bush which bordered one of the paths. It was at that season of the year when the fullness of spring had not yet worn quite away. At a little pond near by, some cleanly dressed children were sailing white canvas boats. In the shade of a green pagoda, a bebuttoned officer of the law was resting, his arms folded, his club at rest in his belt. An old gardener was upon the lawn, with a pair of pruning shears, looking after some bushes. High overhead was the clear blue sky of the new summer, and in the thickness of the shiny green leaves of the trees hopped and twittered the busy sparrows. Hurstwood had come out of his own home that morning, feeling much of the same old annoyance. At his store he had idled, there being no need to write. He had come away to this place with the lightness of heart which characterizes those who put weariness behind. Now, in the shade of this cool green bush, he looked about him with the fancy of the lover. He heard the carts go lumbering by upon the neighboring streets, but they were far off and only buzzed upon his ear. The hum of the surrounding city was faint. The clang of an occasional bell was his music. He looked and dreamed a new dream of pleasure which concerned his present fixed condition not at all. He got back in fancy to the old Hurstwood, who was neither married nor fixed in a solid position for life. He remembered the light spirit in which he once looked after the girls, how he had danced, escorted them home, hung over their gates. He almost wished he was back there again. Here in this pleasant scene he felt as if he were wholly free. At 2, Carrie came tripping along the walk toward him, rosy and clean. She had just recently donned a sailor hat for the season, with a hand of pretty white-dotted blue silk. Her skirt was of a rich blue material, and her shirtwaist matched it, with a thin stripe of blue upon a snow-white ground, stripes that were as fine as hairs. Her brown shoes peeped occasionally from beneath her skirt. She carried her gloves in her hand. Hurstwood looked up at her with delight. "You came, dearest," he said eagerly, standing to meet her and taking her hand. "Of course," she said, smiling. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I didn't know," he replied. He looked at her forehead, which was moist from her brisk walk. Then he took out one of his own soft, scented silk handkerchiefs and touched her face here and there. "Now," he said affectionately, "you're all right." They were happy in being near one another, in looking into each other's eyes. Finally, when the long flush of delight had subsided, he said, "When is Charlie going away again?" "I don't know," she answered. "He says he has some things to do for the house here now." Hurstwood grew serious, and he lapsed into quiet thought. He looked up after a time to say, "Come away and leave him." He turned his eyes to the boys with the boats, as if the request were of little importance. "Where would we go?" she asked in much the same manner, rolling her gloves and looking into a neighboring tree. "Where do you want to go?" he inquired. There was something in the tone in which he had said this which made her feel as if she must record her feelings against any local habitation. "We can't stay in Chicago," she replied. He had no thought that this was in her mind, that any removal would be suggested. "Why not?" he asked softly. "Oh, because," she said, "I wouldn't want to." He listened to this with but dull perception of what it meant. It had no serious ring to it. The question was not up for immediate decision. "I would have to give up my position," he said. The tone he used made it seem as if the matter deserved only slight consideration. Carrie thought a little, the while enjoying the pretty scene. "I wouldn't like to live in Chicago and him here," she said, thinking of Drouet. "It's a big town, dearest," Hurstwood answered. "It would be as good as moving to another part of the country to move to the South Side." He had fixed upon that region as an objective point. "Anyhow," said Carrie, "I shouldn't want to get married as long as he is here. I wouldn't want to run away." The suggestion of marriage struck Hurstwood forcibly. He saw clearly that this was her idea. He felt that it was not to be gotten over easily. Bigamy lightened the horizon of his shadowy thoughts for a moment. He wondered for the life of him how it would all come out. He could not see that he was making any progress save in her regard. When he looked at her now, he thought her beautiful. What a thing it was to have her love him, even if it be entangling. She increased in value in his eyes because of her objection. She was something to struggle for, and that was everything. How different from the women who yielded willingly. He swept the thought of them from his mind. "And you don't know when he'll go away?" asked Hurstwood quietly. She shook her head. He sighed. "You're a determined little miss, aren't you?" he said, after a few moments, looking up into her eyes. She felt a wave of feeling sweep over her at this. It was pride at what seemed his admiration, affection for the man who could feel this concerning her. "No," she said coyly, "but what can I do?" Again he folded his hands and looked away over the lawn into the street. "I wish," he said pathetically, "you would come to me. I don't like to be away from you this way. What good is there in waiting? You're not any happier, are you?" "Happier," she exclaimed softly. "You know better than that." "Here we are, then," he went on in the same tone, "wasting our days. If you are not happy, do you think I am? I sit and write to you the biggest part of the time. I'll tell you what, Carrie," he exclaimed, throwing sudden force of expression into his voice and fixing her with his eyes, "I can't live without you, and that's all there is to it. Now," he concluded, showing a palm of one of his white hands in a sort of at-an-end, helpless expression, "what shall I do?" This shifting of the burden to her appealed to Carrie. The semblance of the load, without the weight, touched the woman's heart. "Can't you wait a little while yet?" she said tenderly. "I'll try and find out when he's going." "What good will it do?" he asked, holding the same strain of feeling. "Well, perhaps we can arrange to go somewhere." She really did not see anything clearer than before, but she was getting into that frame of mind where, out of sympathy, a woman yields. Hurstwood did not understand. He was wondering how she was to be persuaded. What appeal would move her to forsake Drouet? He began to wonder how far her affection for him would carry her. He was thinking of some question which would make her tell. Finally, he hit upon one of those problematic propositions which often disguise our own desires when leading us to an understanding of the difficulties which others make for us, and so discover for us a way. It had not the slightest connection with anything intended on his part, and was spoken at random before he had given it a moment's serious thought. "Carrie," he said, looking into her face, and assuming a serious look which he did not feel. "Suppose I were to come to you next week, or this week for that matter, tonight say, and tell you that I had to go away, that I couldn't stay another minute and wasn't coming back any more. Would you come with me?" His sweetheart viewed him with the most affectionate glance, her answer ready before the words were out of his mouth. "Yes," she said. "You wouldn't stop to argue or arrange? Not if you couldn't wait?" He smiled when he saw that she took him seriously, and he thought what a chance it would afford for a possible junket of a week or two. He had a notion to tell her that he was joking, and so brush away her sweet seriousness, but the effect of it was too delightful. He let it stand. "Suppose we didn't have time to get married here," he added, an afterthought striking him. "If we got married as soon as we got to the other end of the journey, it would be all right." "I meant that," he said. "Yes." The morning seemed peculiarly bright to him now. He wondered whatever could have put such a thought into his head. Impossible as it was, he could not help smiling at its cleverness. It showed him how she loved him. There was no doubt in his mind now, and he would find a way to win her. "Well," he said jokingly, "I'll come and get you one of these evenings." And then he laughed. "I wouldn't stay with you, though, if you didn't marry me," Carrie added reflectively. "I don't want you to," he said tenderly, taking her hand. She was extremely happy now that she understood. She loved him the more for thinking that he would rescue her so. As for him, the marriage clause did not dwell in his mind. He was thinking that with such affection there could be no bar to his eventual happiness. "Let's stroll about," he said gaily, rising and surveying all the lovely park. "All right," said Carrie. They passed the young Irishman, who looked after them with envious eyes. "'Tis a fine couple," he observed to himself. "They must be rich." End of chapter 15. Recording by AndreaDeans.voices.com.
Chapter 16 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Sage. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 16. A Witless Aladdin, the Gate to the World. In the course of his present stay in Chicago, Drouet paid some slight attention to the secret order to which he belonged. During his last trip, he had received a new light on its importance,
"I tell you," said another drummer to him, "it's a great thing. Look at Hasenstab. He isn't so deuced clever. Of course, he's got a good house behind him, but that won't do alone. I tell you, it's his degree. He's a way-up Mason, and that goes a long way. He's got a secret sign that stands for something."
Drouet resolved then and there that he would take more interest in such matters. So, when he got back to Chicago, he repaired to his local lodge headquarters. "I say, Drouet," said Mr. Harry Kinsell, an individual who was very prominent in this local branch of the Elks, "you're the man who can help us out." It was after the business meeting, and things were going socially with a hum. Drouet was bobbing around, chatting and joking with a score of individuals whom he knew.
"What are you up to?"
he inquired genially, turning a smiling face upon his secret brother. "We're trying to get up some theatricals for 2 weeks from today, and we want to know if you don't know some young lady who could take a part. It's an easy part."
"Sure," said Drouet. "What is it?"
He did not trouble to remember that he knew no one to whom he could appeal on this score. His innate good nature, however, dictated a favorable reply. "Well, now, I'll tell you what we're trying to do," went on Mr. Kinsell. "We are trying to get a new set of furniture for the lodge. There isn't enough money in the treasury at the present time, and we thought we would raise it by a little entertainment."
"Sure," interrupted Drouet. "That's a good idea."
"Several of the boys around here have got talent. There's Harry Burbeck. He does a fine blackface turn. Mac Lewis is all right at heavy dramatics. Did you ever hear him recite Over the Hills?
"Never did."
Well, I tell you, he does it fine."
"And you want me to get some woman to take the part?"
questioned Drouet, anxious to terminate the subject and get on to something else.
"What are you going to play?"
"Under the Gaslight," said Mr. Kinsell, mentioning Augustin Daly's famous production, which had worn from a great public success down to an amateur theatrical favorite, with many of the troublesome accessories cut out and the dramatis personae reduced to the smallest possible number. Drouet had seen this play some time in the past.
"Oh, that's fine," he said. "That's a fine play. It'll go all right. You ought to make a lot of money out of that."
"We think we'll do very well," Mr. Kinsell replied. "Don't forget now," he concluded, Drouet showing signs of restlessness, "some young woman to take the part of Laura."
"Sure, I'll attend to it."
He moved away, forgetting almost all about it at the moment Mr. Kinsell had ceased talking. He had not even thought to ask the time or place. Drouet was reminded of his promise a day or two later by the receipt of a letter announcing that the first rehearsal was set for the following Friday evening, and urging him to kindly forward the young lady's address at once, in order that the part might be delivered to her.
"Now, who the deuce do I know?" asked the drummer reflectively, scratching his rosy ear. "I don't know anyone that knows anything about amateur theatricals."
He went over in memory the names of a number of women he knew, and finally fixed on one, largely because of the convenient location of her home on the West Side, and promised himself that as he came out that evening he would see her. When, however, he started west on the car, he forgot, and was only reminded of his delinquency by an item on the evening news, a small 3-line affair under the head of Secret Society Notes, which stated the Custer Lodge of the Order of Elks would give a theatrical performance in Avery Hall on the 16th, when Under the Gaslight would be produced.
"George!" exclaimed Drouet. "I forgot that."
"What?" inquired Carrie. They were at their little table in the room which might have been used for a kitchen, where Carrie occasionally served a meal. Tonight the fancy had caught her, and the little table was spread with a pleasing repast.
"Why, my lodge entertainment. They're going to give a play, and they wanted me to get them some young lady to take a part."
"What is it they're going to play?"
"Under the Gaslight."
"When?"
"On the 16th."
"Well, why don't you?" asked Carrie.
"I don't know anyone," he replied. Suddenly he looked up. "Say," he said, "how would you like to take the part?" "Me?" said Carrie. "I can't act." "How do you know?" questioned Drouet reflectively. "Because," answered Carrie, "I never did." Nevertheless, she was pleased to think he would ask. Her eyes brightened, for if there was anything that enlisted her sympathies, it was the art of the stage. True to his nature, Drouet clung to this idea as an easy way out. "That's nothing. You can act all you have to down there." "No, I can't," said Carrie weakly, very much drawn toward the proposition and yet fearful. "Yes, you can. Now, why don't you do it? They need someone, and it'll be lots of fun for you." "Oh, no, it won't," said Carrie seriously. "You'd like that. I know you would. I've seen you dancing around here and giving imitations, and that's why I asked you. You're clever enough, all right." "No, I'm not," said Carrie. "Now, I'll tell you what to do. You go down and see about it. It'll be fun for you. The rest of the company isn't going to be any good. They haven't any experience. What do they know about theatricals?" He frowned as he thought of their ignorance. "Hand me the coffee," he added. "I don't believe I could act, Charlie," Carrie went on pettishly. "You don't think I could, do you?" "Sure, out of sight. I bet you make a hit. Now, you want to go. I know you do. And I knew it when I came home. That's why I asked you." "What is this play, did you say?" "Under the Gaslight." "What part would they want me to take?" "Oh, one of the heroines. I don't know." "What sort of play is it?" "Well," said Drouet, whose memory for such things was not the best, "it's about a girl who gets kidnapped by a couple of crooks, a man and a woman that live in the slums. She had some money or something, and they wanted to get it. I don't know how it did go exactly." "Don't you know what part I would have to take?" "No, I don't, to tell you the truth." He thought a moment. "Yes, I do. Laura, that's the thing. You're to be Laura." "And you can't remember what the part is like?" "To save me, Cad, I can't," he answered. "I ought to, too. I've seen the play enough. There's a girl in it that was stolen when she was an infant. Was picked off the street or something, and she's the one that's hounded by the two old criminals I was telling you about." He stopped with a mouthful of pie poised on a fork before his face. "She comes very near getting drowned. No, that's not it. I'll tell you what I'll do," he concluded hopelessly. "I'll get you the book. I can't remember now for the life of me." "Well, I don't know," said Carrie, when he had concluded, her interest and desire to shine dramatically struggling with her timidity for the mastery. "I might go if you thought I'd do all right." "Of course you'll do," said Drouet, who in his efforts to enthuse Carrie had interested himself. "Do you think I'd come home here and urge you to do something that I didn't think you'd make a success of? You can act all right. It'll be good for you." "When must I go?" said Carrie reflectively. "The first rehearsal is Friday night. I'll get the part for you tonight." "All right," said Carrie resignedly. "I'll do it. But if I make a failure now, it's your fault." "You won't fail," assured Drouet. "Just act as you do around here. Be natural. You're all right. I've often thought you'd make a corking good actress." "Do you really?" asked Carrie. "That's right," said the drummer. He little knew, as he went out of the door that night, what a secret flame he had kindled in the bosom of the girl he left behind. Carrie was possessed of that sympathetic, impressionable nature which, ever in the most developed form, has been the glory of the drama. She was created with that passivity of soul which is always the mirror of the active world. She possessed an innate taste for imitation and no small ability. Even without practice, she could sometimes restore dramatic situations she had witnessed by recreating, before her mirror, the expressions of the various faces taking part in the scene. She loved to modulate her voice after the conventional manner of the distressed heroine, and repeat such pathetic fragments as appealed most to her sympathies. Of late,
seeing the airy grace of the ingenue in several well-constructed plays, she had been moved to secretly imitate it, and many were the little movements and expressions of the body in which she indulged from time to time in the privacy of her chamber. On several occasions, when Drouet had caught her admiring herself, as he imagined, in the mirror, she was doing nothing more than recalling some little grace of the mouth or the eyes which she had witnessed in another. Under his airy accusation she mistook this for vanity and accepted the blame with a faint sense of error, though, as a matter of fact, it was nothing more than the first subtle outcroppings of an artistic nature, endeavoring to recreate the perfect likeness of some phase of beauty which appealed to her. In such feeble tendencies, be it known, such outworking of desire to reproduce life, lies the basis of all dramatic art. Now, when Carrie heard Drouet's laudatory opinion of her dramatic ability, her body tingled with satisfaction. Like the flame which welds the loosened particles into a solid mass, his words united those floating wisps of feeling which she had felt but never believed concerning her possible ability, and made them into a gaudy shred of hope. Like all human beings, she had a touch of vanity. She felt that she could do things if only she had the chance. How often had she looked at the well-dressed actresses on the stage and wondered how she would look, how delightful she would feel if only she were in their place. The glamour, the tense situation, the fine clothes, the applause, these had lured her until she felt that she too could act, that she too could compel acknowledgment of power. Now she was told that she really could, that little things she had done about the house had made him feel her power. It was a delightful sensation while it lasted. When Drouet was gone, she sat down in her rocking chair by the window to think about it. As usual, imagination exaggerated the possibilities for her. It was as if he had put 50 cents in her hand and she had exercised the thoughts of $1,000. She saw herself in a score of pathetic situations in which she assumed a tremulous voice and suffering manner. Her mind delighted itself with scenes of luxury and refinement, situations in which she was the cynosure of all eyes, the arbiter of all fates. As she rocked to and fro, she felt the tensity of woe in abandonment, the magnificence of wrath after deception, the languor of sorrow after defeat. Thoughts of all the charming women she had seen in plays, every fancy, every illusion which she had concerning the stage, now came back as a returning tide after the ebb. She built up feelings and a determination which the occasion did not warrant. Drouet dropped in at the lodge when he went downtown and swashed around with a great air as Kinsell met him. "Where is that young lady you were going to get us?" asked the latter. "I've got her," said Drouet. "Have you?" said Kinsell, rather surprised by his promptness. "That's good. What's her address?" And he pulled out his notebook in order to be able to send her part to her. "You want to send her part?" asked the drummer. "Yes." "Well, I'll take it. I'm going right by her house in the morning." "What did you say her address was? We only want it in case we have any information to send her." 29 Ogden Place. "And her name?" "Carrie Medenda," said the drummer, firing at random. The lodge members knew him to be single. "That sounds like somebody that can act, doesn't it?" said Kinsell. "Yes, it does." He took the part home to Carrie and handed it to her with the manner of one who does a favor. "He says that's the best part. Do you think you can do it?" "I don't know until I look it over. You know, I'm afraid now that I've said I would." "Ah, go on. What have you to be afraid of? It's a cheap company. The rest of them aren't as good as you are." "Well, I'll see," said Carrie, pleased to have the part for all her misgivings. He sidled around, dressing and fidgeting, before he arranged to make his next remark. "They were getting ready to print the programs," he said, "and I gave them the name of Carrie Medenda. Was that all right?" "Yes, I guess so," said his companion, looking up at him. She was thinking it was slightly strange.
if you didn't make a hit, you know, he went on.
Oh, yes, she answered, rather pleased now with his caution. It was clever for Drouet.
I didn't want to introduce you as my wife, because you'd feel worse then if you didn't go. They all know me so well. But you'll go all right. Anyhow, you'll probably never meet any of 'em again.
Oh, I don't care, said Carrie desperately. She was determined now to have a try at the fascinating game. Drouet breathed a sigh of relief. He had been afraid that he was about to precipitate another conversation upon the marriage question. The part of Laura, as Carrie found out when she began to examine it, was one of suffering and tears. As delineated by Mr. Daly, it was true to the most sacred traditions of melodrama as he found it when he began his career. The sorrowful demeanor, the tremolo music, the long, explanatory, cumulative addresses, all were there. "Poor fellow," read Carrie, consulting the text and drawing her voice out pathetically. "Martin, be sure and give him a glass of wine before he goes." She was surprised at the briefness of the entire part, not knowing that she must be on stage while others were talking, and not only be there, but also keep herself in harmony with the dramatic movement of the scenes. "I think I can do that, though," she concluded. When Drouet came the next night, she was very much satisfied with her day's study.
"Well, how goes it, Caddy?" he asked.
"All right," she laughed. "I think I have it memorized nearly."
"That's good," he said. "Let's hear some of it."
"Oh, I don't know whether I can get up and say it off here," she said bashfully.
"Well, I don't know why you shouldn't. It'll be easier here than it will be there."
"I don't know about that," she answered. Eventually, she took off the ballroom episode with considerable feeling, forgetting, as she got deeper in the scene, all about Drouet, and letting herself rise to a fine state of feeling.
"Good," said Drouet. "Fine, out of sight. You're all right, Caddy, I tell you."
He was really moved by her excellent representation and the general appearance of the pathetic little figure as it swayed and finally fainted to the floor. He had bounded up to catch her and now held her laughing in his arms.
"Ain't you afraid you'll hurt yourself?" he asked.
"Not a bit."
"Well, you're a wonder. Say, I never knew you could do anything like that."
"I never did either," said Carrie merrily, her face flushed with delight.
"Well, you can bet that you're all right," said Drouet. "You can take my word for that. You won't fail."
End of chapter 16. Recording by Bob Sage. Chapter 17 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Sage. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 17. A Glimpse Through the Gateway. Hope Lightens the Eye. The, to Carrie, very important theatrical performance was to take place at the Avery on conditions which were to make it more noteworthy than was first anticipated. The little dramatic student had written to Hurstwood the very morning her part was brought her that she was going to take part in a play. "I really am," she wrote, feeling that he might take it as a jest. "I have my part now, honest, truly." Hurstwood smiled in an indulgent way as he read this. "I wonder what it's going to be. I must see that." He answered at once, making a pleasant reference to her ability. "I haven't the slightest doubt you will make a success. You must come to the park tomorrow morning and tell me all about it." Carrie gladly complied, and revealed all the details of the undertaking as she understood it. "Well," he said, "that's fine. I'm glad to hear it. Of course, you will do well. You're so clever." He had truly never seen so much spirit in the girl before. Her tendency to discover a touch of sadness had for the nonce disappeared. As she spoke, her eyes were bright, her cheeks red. She radiated much of the pleasure which her undertakings gave her. For all her misgivings, and they were as plentiful as the moments of the day, she was still happy. She could not suppress her delight in doing this little thing which, to an ordinary observer, had no importance at all. Hurstwood was charmed by the development of the fact that the girl had capabilities. There is nothing so inspiring in life as the sight of a legitimate ambition, no matter how incipient. It gives color, force, and beauty to the possessor. Carrie was now lightened by a touch of this divine afflatus. She drew to herself commendation from her two admirers, which she had not earned. Their affection for her naturally heightened their perception of what she was trying to do, and their approval of what she did. Her inexperience conserved her own exuberant fancy, which ran riot with every straw of opportunity, making of it a golden divining rod, whereby the treasure of life was to be discovered. "Let's see," said Hurstwood. "I ought to know some of the boys in the lodge. I'm an Elk myself."
"Oh, you mustn't let him know I told you."
"That's so," said the manager.
"I'd like for you to be there if you want to come, but I don't see how you can, unless he asks you."
"I'll be there," said Hurstwood affectionately. "I can fix it so he won't know you told me. You leave it to me." This interest of the manager was a large thing in itself for the performance, for his standing among the Elks was something worth talking about. Already he was thinking of a box with some friends and flowers for Carrie. He would make it a dress-suit affair and give the little girl a chance. Within a day or two, Drouet dropped into the Adams Street Resort, and he was at once spied by Hurstwood. It was at 5 in the afternoon, and the place was crowded with merchants, actors, managers, politicians, a goodly company of rotund, rosy figures, silk-hatted, starchy-bosomed, be-ringed and be-scarf-pinned to the Queen's taste. John L. Sullivan, the pugilist, was at one end of the glittering bar, surrounded by a company of loudly dressed sports who were holding a most animated conversation. Drouet came across the floor with a festive stride, a new pair of tan shoes squeaking audibly at his progress. "Well, sir," said Hurstwood, "I was wondering what had become of you. I thought you'd gone out of town again." Drouet laughed. "If you don't report more regularly, we'll have to cut you off the list."
"Couldn't help it," said the drummer. "I've been busy."
They strolled over toward the bar, amid the noisy, shifting company of notables. The dressy manager was shaken by the hand 3 times in as many minutes. "I hear your lodge is giving a performance," observed Hurstwood in the most offhand manner.
"Yes, who told you?"
"No one," said Hurstwood. "They just sent me a couple of tickets, which I have for $2. Is it going to be any good?"
"I don't know," replied the drummer. "They've been trying to get me to get some woman to take a part."
"I wasn't intending to go," said the manager easily. "I'll subscribe, of course. How are things over there?"
"All right. They're going to fit things up out of the proceeds."
"Well," said the manager, "I hope they make a success of it. Have another?" He did not intend to say any more. Now, if he should appear on the scene with a few friends, he could say that he had been urged to come along. Drouet had a desire to wipe out the possibility of confusion.
"I think the girl is going to take a part in it," he said abruptly, after thinking it over.
"You don't say so. How did that happen?"
"Well, they were short and wanted me to find them someone. I told Carrie, and she seems to want to try."
"Good for her," said the manager. "It'll be a real nice affair. Do her good, too. Has she ever had any experience?"
"Not a bit."
"Well, it isn't anything very serious."
"She's clever, though," said Drouet, casting off any imputation against Carrie's ability. "She picks up her part quick enough."
"You don't say so," said the manager.
"Yes, sir. She surprised me the other night. By George, if she didn't."
"You must give her a nice little send-off," said the manager. "I'll look after the flowers." Drouet smiled at his good nature. "After the show, you must come with me and we'll have a little supper."
"I think she'll do all right," said Drouet.
"I want to see her. She's got to do all right. We'll make her." And the manager gave one of his quick, steely half-smiles, which was a compound of good nature and shrewdness. Carrie, meanwhile, attended the first rehearsal. At this performance, Mr. Kinsell presided, aided by Mr. Millis, a young man who had some qualifications of past experience, which were not exactly understood by anyone. He was so experienced and so businesslike, however, that he came very near to being rude, failing to remember as he did that the individuals he was trying to instruct were volunteer players and not salaried underlings.
Now, Mrs. Medenda, he said, addressing Carrie, who stood in one part, uncertain as to what move to make, you don't want to stand like that. Put expression on your face. Remember, you're troubled over the intrusion of the stranger. Walk so.
And he struck out across the Avery stage in a most drooping manner. Carrie did not exactly fancy the suggestion, but the novelty of the situation, the presence of strangers, all more or less nervous, and the desire to do anything rather than make a failure made her timid. She walked in imitation of her mentor, as requested, inwardly feeling that there was something strangely lacking.
Now, Mrs. Morgan, said the director to one young married woman who was to take the part of Pearl, you sit here. Now, Mr. Bamberger, you stand here. So. Now, what is it you say?
Explain, said Mr. Bamberger feebly. He had the part of Ray, Laura's lover, the society individual who was to waver in his thoughts of marrying her upon finding that she was a waif and a nobody by birth.
How is that? What does your text say?
Explain, repeated Mr. Bamberger, looking intently at his part.
Yes, but it also says, the director remarked, that you are to look shocked. Now, say it again and see if you can't look shocked. Explain, demanded Mr. Bamberger vigorously. No, no, that won't do. Say it this way. Explain. Explain, said Mr. Bamberger, giving a modified imitation. That's better. Now, go on.
One night, resumed Mrs. Morgan, whose lines came next, father and mother were going to the opera. When they were crossing Broadway, the usual crowd of children accosted them for alms.
Hold on, said the director, rushing forward, his arm extended. Put more feeling into what you're saying.
Mrs. Morgan looked at him as if she feared a personal assault. Her eye lightened with resentment.
Remember, Mrs. Morgan, he added, ignoring the gleam, but modifying his manner, that you're telling a pathetic story. You are now supposed to be telling something that is a grief to you. It requires feeling, repression. Thus,
the usual crowd of children accosted them for alms.
All right, said Mrs. Morgan. Now, go on.
As mother felt in her pocket for some change, her fingers touched a cold and trembling hand which had clutched her purse.
Very good,
interrupted the director, nodding his head significantly.
A pickpocket. Well, exclaimed Mr. Bamberger, speaking the lines that here fell to him. No, no, Mr. Bamberger, said the director, approaching. Not that way. A pickpocket. Well, so that's the idea.
Don't you think, said Carrie weakly, noticing that it had not been proved yet whether the members of the company knew their lines, let alone the details of the expression, that it would be better if we just went through our lines once to see if we know them? We might pick up some points.
A very good idea, Miss Medenda, said Mr. Kinsell, who sat at the side of the stage, looking serenely on, and volunteering opinions which the director did not heed. All right, said the latter, somewhat abashed. It might be well to do it. Then, brightening with a show of authority, suppose we run it through, putting in as much expression as we can. Good, said Mr. Kinsell.
This hand, resumed Mrs. Morgan, glancing up at Mr. Bamberger and down at her book as the lines proceeded, my mother grasped in her own, and so tight that a small, feeble voice uttered an exclamation of pain. Mother looked down, and there beside her was a little ragged girl. Very good, observed the director, now hopelessly idle.
The thief!
exclaimed Mr. Bamberger. "Louder!" put in the director, finding it almost impossible to keep his hands off. "The thief!" roared poor Bamberger. "Yes, but a thief hardly 6 years old, with a face like an angel. 'Stop!' said my mother. 'What are you doing?' 'Trying to steal,' said the child. 'Don't you know that it is wicked to do so?' asked my father. 'No,' said the little girl, 'but it is dreadful to be hungry.' 'Who told you to steal?' asked my mother. 'She, there,' said the child, pointing to a squalid woman in a doorway opposite, who fled suddenly down the street. 'That is old Judas,' said the girl. Mrs. Morgan read this rather flatly, and the director was in despair. He fidgeted around and then went over to Mr. Kinsell. "What do you think of them?" he asked. "Oh, I guess we'll be able to whip 'em into shape," said the latter, with an air of strength under difficulties. "I don't know," said the director. "That fellow Bamberger strikes me as being a pretty poor shift for a lover." "He's all we've got," said Kinsell, rolling up his eyes. "Harrison went back on me at the last minute. Who else can we get?" "I don't know," said the director. "I'm afraid he'll never pick up." At this moment Bamberger was exclaiming, "Pearl, you are joking with me." "Look at that now," said the director, whispering behind his hand. "My lord, what can you do with a man who draws out a sentence like that?" "Do the best you can," said Kinsell consolingly. The rendition ran on in this wise until it came to where Carrie, as Laura, comes into the room to explain to Ray, who, after hearing Pearl's statement about her birth, had written the letter repudiating her, which, however, he did not deliver. Bamberger was just concluding the words of Ray, "I must go before she returns. Her step. Too late," and was cramming the letter in his pocket when she began sweetly with, "Ray, Miss Cortland," Bamberger faltered weakly. Carrie looked at him a moment and forgot all about the company present. She began to feel the part and summoned an indifferent smile to her lips, turning as the lines directed and going to a window as if he were not present. She did it with a grace which was fascinating to look upon. "Who is that woman?" asked the director, watching Carrie in her little scene with Bamberger. "Miss Medenda," said Kinsell. "I know her name," said the director, "but what does she do?" "I don't know," said Kinsell. "She's a friend of one of our members." "Well, she's got more gumption than anyone I've seen here so far. Seems to take an interest in what she's doing." "Pretty, too, isn't she?" said Kinsell. The director strolled away without answering. In the second scene, where she was supposed to face the company in the ballroom, she did even better, winning the smile of the director, who volunteered, because of her fascination for him, to come over and speak with her. "Were you ever on the stage?" he asked insinuatingly. "No," said Carrie. "You do so well. I thought you might have had some experience." Carrie only smiled consciously. He walked away to listen to Bamberger, who was feebly spouting some ardent line. Mrs. Morgan saw the drift of things and gleamed at Carrie with envious and snapping black eyes. "She's some cheap professional," she gave herself the satisfaction of thinking, and scorned and hated her accordingly. The rehearsal ended for one day, and Carrie went home feeling that she had acquitted herself satisfactorily. The words of the director were ringing in her ears, and she longed for an opportunity to tell Hurstwood. She wanted him to know just how well she was doing. Drouet, too, was an object for her confidences. She could hardly wait until he should ask her, and yet she did not have the vanity to bring it up. The drummer, however, had another line of thought tonight, and her little experience did not appeal to him as important. He let the conversation drop, save for what she chose to recite without solicitation, and Carrie was not good at that. He took it for granted that she was doing very well, and he was relieved of further worry. Consequently, he threw Carrie into repression, which was irritating. She felt his indifference keenly, and longed to see Hurstwood. It was as if he were here now, and the only friend she had on earth. The next morning Drouet was interested again, but the damage had been done. She got a pretty letter from the manager saying that by the time she got it he would be waiting for her in the park. When she came, he shone upon her as the morning sun. "Well, my dear," he asked, "how did you come out?" "Well enough," she said, still somewhat reduced after Drouet. "Now, tell me just what you did. Was it pleasant?" Carrie related the incidents of the rehearsal, warming up as she proceeded. "Well, that's delightful," said Hurstwood. "I'm so glad. I must get over there to see you. When is the next rehearsal?" "Tuesday," said Carrie, "but they don't allow visitors." "I imagine I could get in," said Hurstwood significantly. She was completely restored and delighted by his consideration, but she made him promise not to come around. "Now, you must do your best to please me," he said encouragingly. "Just remember that I want you to succeed. We'll make the performance worthwhile. You do that now." "I'll try," said Carrie, brimming with affection and enthusiasm. "That's the girl," said Hurstwood fondly. "Now, remember," shaking an affectionate finger at her, "your best." "I will," she answered, looking back. The whole earth was brimming sunshine that morning. She tripped along, the clear sky pouring liquid blue into her soul. Oh, blessed are the children of endeavor in this, that they try and are hopeful. And blessed also are they who, knowing, smile and approve. End of chapter 17. Recording by Bob Sage. Chapter 18 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Sage. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 18. Just Over the Border, A Hail and Farewell. By the evening of the 16th, the subtle hand of Hurstwood had made itself apparent. He had given the word among his friends, and they were many and influential, that here was something which they ought to attend, and as a consequence the sale of tickets by Mr. Kinsell, acting for the lodge, had been large. Small four-line notes had appeared in all the daily newspapers. These he had arranged for by the aid of one of his newspaper friends on the Times, Mr. Harry McGarren, the managing editor. "Say, Harry," Hurstwood said to him one evening, as the latter stood at the bar drinking before wending his belated way homeward, "you can help the boys out, I guess." "What is it?" said Mr. McGarren, pleased to be consulted by the opulent manager. The Custer Lodge is getting up a little entertainment for their own good, and they'd like a little newspaper notice. You know what I mean, a squib or two saying that it's going to take place." "Certainly," said McGarren. "I can fix that for you, George." At the same time, Hurstwood kept himself wholly in the background. The members of Custer Lodge could scarcely understand why their little affair was taking off so well. Mr. Harry Kinsell was looked upon as quite a star for this sort of work. By the time the 16th had arrived, Hurstwood's friends had rallied like Romans to a senator's call. A well-dressed, good-natured, flatteringly inclined audience was assured from the moment he thought of assisting Carrie. That little student had mastered her part to her own satisfaction, much as she trembled for her fate when she should once face the gathered throng behind the glare of the footlights. She tried to console herself with the thought that a score of other persons, men and women, were equally tremulous concerning the outcome of their efforts, but she could not dissociate the general danger from her own individual liability. She feared that she would forget her lines, that she might be unable to master the feeling which she now felt concerning her own movements in the play. At times she wished that she had never gone into the affair. At others she trembled lest she should be paralyzed with fear and stand white and gasping, not knowing what to say, and spoiling the entire performance. In the matter of the company, Mr. Bamberger had disappeared. That hopeless example had fallen under the lance of the director's criticism. Mrs. Morgan was still present, but envious and determined, if for nothing more than spite, to do as well as Carrie at least. A loafing professional had been called in to assume the role of Ray, and while he was a poor stick of his kind, he was not troubled by any of those qualms which attack the spirit of those who have never faced an audience. He swashed about, cautioned though he was to maintain silence concerning his past theatrical relationships, in such a self-confident manner that he was like to convince everyone of his identity by mere matter of circumstantial evidence. "It's so easy," he said to Mrs. Morgan in the usual affected stage voice. "An audience would be the last thing to trouble me. It's the spirit of the part, you know, that is difficult." Carrie disliked his appearance, but she was too much the actress not to swallow his qualities with complacence, seeing that she must suffer his fictitious love for the evening. At 6 she was ready to go. Theatrical paraphernalia had been provided over and above her care. She had practiced her makeup in the morning, had rehearsed and arranged her material for the evening by 1 o'clock, and had gone home to have a final look at her part, waiting for the evening to come. On this occasion the lodge sent a carriage. Drouet rode with her as far as the door, and then went about the neighboring stores looking for some good cigars. The little actress marched nervously into her dressing-room and began that painfully anticipated matter of makeup which was to transform her, a simple maiden, to Laura, the belle of society. The flare of the gas jets, the open trunks suggestive of travel and display, the scattered contents of the makeup box, rouge, pearl powder, whiting, burnt cork, India ink, pencils for the eyelids, wigs, scissors, looking-glasses, drapery, in short, all the nameless paraphernalia of disguise, have a remarkable atmosphere of their own. Since her arrival in the city, many things had influenced her, but always in a far-removed manner. This new atmosphere was more friendly. It was wholly unlike the great, brilliant mansions which waved her coldly away, permitting her only awe and distant wonder. This took her by the hand kindly, as one who says, "My dear, come in." It opened for her as if for its own. She had wondered at the greatness of the names upon the billboards, the marvel of the long notices in the paper, the beauty of the dresses upon the stage, the atmosphere of carriages, flowers, refinement. Here was no illusion. Here was an open door to see all of that. She had come upon it as one who stumbles upon a secret passage, and behold, she was in the chamber of diamonds and delight. As she dressed with a flutter in her little stage room, hearing the voices outside, seeing Mr. Kinsell hurrying here and there, noting Mrs. Morgan and Mrs. Hoagland at their nervous work of preparation, seeing all the 20 members of the cast moving about and worrying over what the result would be, she could not help thinking what a delight this would be if it would endure. How perfect a state if she could only do well now, and then, sometime, get a place as a real actress. The thought had taken a mighty hold upon her. It hummed in her ears as the melody of an old song. Outside, in the little lobby, another scene was being enacted. Without the interest of Hurstwood, the little hall would probably have been comfortably filled, for the members of the lodge were moderately interested in its welfare. Hurstwood's word, however, had gone the rounds. It was to be a full-dress affair. The 4 boxes had been taken. Dr. Norman McNeill Hale and his wife were to occupy one. This was quite a card. C.R. Walker, dry goods merchant and possessor of at least $200,000, had taken another. A well-known coal merchant had been induced to take the third, and Hurstwood and his friends had the fourth. Among the latter was Drouet. The people who were now pouring here were not celebrities, nor even local notabilities in a general sense. They were the lights of a certain circle, the circle of small fortunes and secret order distinctions. These gentlemen Elks knew the standing of one another. They had regard for the ability which could amass a small fortune, own a nice home, keep a barouche or carriage, perhaps wear fine clothes, and maintain a good mercantile position. Naturally, Hurstwood, who was a little above the order of mind which accepted this standard as perfect, who had shrewdness and much assumption of dignity, who held an imposing and authoritative position and commanded friendship by intuitive tact in handling people, was quite a figure. He was more generally known than most others in the same circle, and was looked upon as someone whose reserve covered a mine of influence and a solid financial prosperity. Tonight he was in his element. He came with several friends, directly from Rector's in a carriage. In the lobby he met Drouet, who was just returning from a trip for more cigars. All five now joined in an animated conversation concerning the company present, and the general drift of lodge affairs. "Who's here?" said Hurstwood, passing into the theatre proper, where the lights were turned up, and a company of gentlemen were laughing and talking in the open space back of the seats. "Why, how do you do, Mr. Hurstwood?" came from the first individual recognized. "Glad to see you," said the latter, grasping his hand lightly. "Looks like quite an affair, doesn't it?" "Yes, indeed," said the manager. "Custer seems to have the backing of its members," observed the friend. "So it should have," said the knowing manager. "I'm glad to see it." "Well, George," said another rotund citizen, whose avoirdupois made necessary an almost alarming display of starched shirt bosom, "how goes it with you?" "Excellent," said the manager. "What brings you over here? You're not a member of Custer." "Good nature," returned the manager. "Like to see the boys, you know." "Wife here?" She couldn't come tonight. She's not well." "Oh, sorry to hear that. Nothing serious, I hope." "No, just feeling a little ill." "I remember Mrs. Hurstwood when she was traveling once with you over at St. Joe." And here the newcomer launched off in a trivial recollection which was terminated by the arrival of more friends. "Why, George, how are you?" said another genial West Side politician and lodge member. "My, but I'm glad to see you again. How are things, anyhow?" "Very well. I see you got the nomination for alderman." "Yes, we whipped them out over there without much trouble." "What do you suppose Hennessy'll do now?" "Oh, he'll go back to his brick business. He has a brickyard, you know." "I didn't know that," said the manager. "Felt pretty sore, I suppose, over his defeat." "Perhaps," said the other, winking shrewdly. Some of the more favored of his friends, whom he had invited, began to roll up in carriages now. They came shuffling in with great show of finery and much evident feeling of content and importance. "Here we are," said Hurstwood, turning to one from a group with whom he was talking. "That's right," returned the newcomer, a gentleman of about 45. "And say," he whispered jovially, pulling Hurstwood over by the shoulder so that he might whisper in his ears, "if this isn't a good show, I'll punch your head." "You ought to pay for seeing your old friends. Bother the show." To another who inquired, "Is it really something good?" the manager replied, "I don't know. I don't suppose so." Then, lifting his hand graciously, "For the lodge. Lots of boys out, huh?" "Yes. Look up Shanahan. He was just asking for you a moment ago." It was thus that the little theatre resounded to a babble of successful voices, the creak of fine clothes, the commonplace of good nature, and all largely because of this man's bidding. Look at him any time within the half hour before the curtain was up, he was a member of an eminent group, a rounded company of 5 or more whose stout figures, large white bosoms, and shining pins bespoke the character of their success. The gentlemen who brought their wives called him out to shake hands. Seats clicked. Ushers bowed, while he looked blandly on. He was evidently a light among them, reflecting in his personality the ambitions of those who greeted him. He was acknowledged, fawned upon, in a way lionized. Through it all one could see the standing of the man. It was a greatness in a way, small as it was. End of chapter 18. Recording by Bob Sage. Chapter 19 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Sage. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 19. An Hour in Elfland. A Clamor Half Heard. At last the curtain was ready to go up. All the details of the make-up had been completed, and the company settled down as the leader of the small hired orchestra tapped significantly upon his music rack with his baton and began the soft, curtain-raising strain. Hurstwood ceased talking and went with Drouet and his friend Sagar Morrison around to the box. "Now we'll see how the little girl does," he said to Drouet, in a tone which no one else could hear. On the stage, 6 of the characters had already appeared in the opening parlor scene. Drouet and Hurstwood saw at a glance that Carrie was not among them, and went on talking in a whisper. Mrs. Morgan, Mrs. Hoagland, and the actor who had taken Bamberger's part were representing the principal roles in the scene. The professional whose name was Patton had little to recommend him outside of his assurance, but this, at the present moment, was most palpably needed. Mrs. Morgan, as Pearl, was stiff with fright. Mrs. Hoagland was husky in the throat. The whole company was so weak-kneed that the lines were merely spoken and nothing more. It took all the hope and uncritical good nature of the audience to keep from manifesting pity by the unrest which is the agony of failure. Hurstwood was perfectly indifferent. He took it for granted that it would be worthless. All he cared for was to have it endurable enough to allow for pretension and congratulation afterwards. After the first rush of fright, however, the players got over the danger of collapse. They rambled weakly forward, losing nearly all the expression which was intended, and making the thing dull in the extreme, when Carrie came in. One glance at her, and both Hurstwood and Drouet saw plainly that she also was weak-kneed. She came faintly across the stage, saying, "And you, sir, we have been looking for you since 8 o'clock," but with so little color and in such a feeble voice that it was positively painful. "She's frightened," whispered Drouet to Hurstwood. The manager made no answer. She had a line presently which was supposed to be funny. "Well, that's as much as to say that I'm a sort of life pill." It came out so flat, however, that it was a deathly thing. Drouet fidgeted. Hurstwood moved his toe the least bit. There was another place in which Laura was to rise, and with a sense of impending disaster say sadly, "I wish you hadn't said that, Pearl. You know the old proverb, 'Call a maid by a married name.'" The lack of feeling in the thing was ridiculous. Carrie did not get it at all. She seemed to be talking in her sleep. It looked as if she were certain to be a wretched failure. She was more hopeless than Mrs. Morgan, who had recovered somewhat, and was now saying her lines clearly at least. Drouet looked away from the stage at the audience. The latter held out silently, hoping for a general change, of course. Hurstwood fixed his eye on Carrie, as if to hypnotize her into doing better. He was pouring determination of his own in her direction. He felt sorry for her. In a few minutes it fell to her to read the letter sent in by the strange villain. The audience had been slightly diverted by a conversation between the professional actor and a character called Snorky, impersonated by a short little American who really developed some humor as a half-crazed, one-armed soldier turned messenger for a living. He bawled his lines out with such defiance that, while they really did not partake of the humor intended, they were funny. Now he was off, however, and it was back to pathos, with Carrie as the chief figure. She did not recover. She wandered through the whole scene between herself and the intruding villain, straining the patience of the audience, and finally exiting, much to their relief. "She's too nervous," said Drouet, feeling in the mildness of the remark that he was lying for once. "Better go back and say a word to her." Drouet was glad to do anything for relief. He fairly hustled around to the side entrance and was let in by the friendly doorkeeper. Carrie was standing in the wings, weakly waiting her next cue, all the snap and nerve gone out of her. "Say, Cad," he said, looking at her, "you mustn't be nervous. Wake up. Those guys out there don't amount to anything. What are you afraid of?" "I don't know," said Carrie. "I just don't seem to be able to do it." She was grateful for the drummer's presence, though. She had found the company so nervous that her own strength had gone. "Come on," said Drouet. "Brace up. What are you afraid of? Go on out there now and do the trick. What do you care?" Carrie revived a little under the drummer's electrical, nervous condition. "Did I do so very bad?" "Not a bit. All you need is a little more ginger. Do it as you showed me. Get that toss of your head. You had it the other night." Carrie remembered her triumph in the room. She tried to think she could do it. "What next?" he said, looking at her part, which she had been studying. "Why, the scene between Ray and me when I refuse him." "Well, now you do that lively," said the drummer. "Put in, snap, that's the thing. Act as if you didn't care." "Your turn next, Miss Medenda," said the prompter. "Oh, dear," said Carrie. "Well, you're a chump for being afraid," said Drouet. "Come on now, brace up. I'll watch you from right here." "Will you?" said Carrie. "Yes, go on now. Don't be afraid." The prompter signaled her. She started out, weak as ever, but suddenly her nerve partially returned. She thought of Drouet looking. "Ray," she said gently, using a tone of voice much more calm than when she had last appeared. It was the scene which had pleased the director at the rehearsal. "She's easier," thought Hurstwood to himself. She did not do the part as she had at rehearsal, but she was better. The audience was at least not irritated. The improvement of the work of the entire company took away direct observation from her. They were making fair progress, and now it looked as if the play would be passable, in the less trying parts at least. Carrie came off warm and nervous. "Well," she said, looking at him, "was it any better?" "Well, I should say so. That's the way. Put life into it. You did that about 1,000% better than you did the other scene. Now, go on and fire up. You can do it. Knock 'em." "Was it really better?" "Better, I should say so. What comes next?" "That ballroom scene." "Well, you can do that all right," he said. "I don't know," answered Carrie. "Why, woman," he exclaimed, "you did it for me. Now you go out there and do it. It'll be fun for you. Just do it as you did it in the room. If you'll reel it off that way, I'll bet you'll make a hit. Now, what'll you bet? You do it." The drummer usually allowed his ardent good nature to get the better of his speech. He really did think that Carrie had acted this particular scene very well, and he wanted her to repeat it in public. His enthusiasm was due to the mere spirit of the occasion. When the time came, he buoyed Carrie up most effectually. He began to make her feel as if she had done very well. The old melancholy of desire began to come back as he talked to her, and by the time the situation rolled around she was running high on feeling. "I think I can do this." "Sure you can. Now you go ahead and see." On the stage, Mrs. Van Dam was making her cruel insinuation against Laura. Carrie listened and caught the infection of something. She did not know what. Her nostrils sniffed thinly. "It means," the professional actor began, speaking as Ray, "that the society is a terrible avenger of insult. Have you heard of the Siberian wolves? Well, when one of the pack falls through weakness, the others devour him. It is not an elegant comparison, but there is something wolfish in society. Laura has mocked it with pretense, and society, which is made up of pretense, will bitterly resent the mockery." At the sound of her stage name, Carrie started. She began to feel the bitterness of the situation. The feeling of the outcast descended upon her. She hung at the wing's edge, wrapped in her own mounting thoughts. She hardly heard anything more save her own rumbling blood. "Come, girls," said Mrs. Van Dam solemnly, "let us look after our things. They are no longer safe when such an accomplished thief enters." "Cue," said the prompter, close to her side, but she did not hear. Already she was moving forward with a steady grace born of inspiration. She dawned upon the audience, handsome and proud, shifting with the necessity of the situation to a cold, white, helpless object as the social pack moved away from her scornfully. Hurstwood blinked his eyes and caught the infection. The radiating waves of feeling and sincerity were already breaking against the farthest walls of the chamber. The magic of passion, which will yet dissolve the world, was here at work. There was a drawing, too, of attention, a riveting of feeling, heretofore wandering. "Ray, Ray, why do you not come back to her?" was the cry of Pearl. Every eye was fixed on Carrie, still proud and scornful. They moved as she moved. Their eyes were with her eyes. Mrs. Morgan, as Pearl, approached her. "Let us go home," she said. "No," answered Carrie, her voice assuming for the first time a penetrating quality which it had never known. "Stay with him." She pointed an almost accusing hand toward her lover. Then, with a pathos which struck home because of its utter simplicity, "He shall not suffer long." Hurstwood realized that he was seeing something extraordinarily good. It was heightened for him by the applause of the audience as the curtain descended and the fact that it was Carrie. He thought now that she was beautiful. She had done something which was above his sphere. He felt a keen delight in realizing that she was his. "Fine," he said, and then, seized by a sudden impulse, arose and went about to the stage door. When he came in upon Carrie, she was still with Drouet. His feelings for her were most exuberant. He was almost swept away by the strength and feeling she exhibited. His desire was to pour forth his praise with the unbounded feelings of a lover, but here was Drouet, whose affection was also rapidly reviving. The latter was more fascinated, if anything, than Hurstwood. At least, in the nature of things, it took a more ruddy form. "Well, well," said Drouet, "you did out of sight. That was simply great. I knew you could do it. Ah, but you're a little daisy." Carrie's eyes flamed with the light of achievement. "Did I do all right?" "Did you? Well, I guess. Didn't you hear the applause?" There was some faint sound of clapping yet. "I thought I got it something like, I felt it." Just then Hurstwood came in. Instinctively he felt the change in Drouet. He saw that the drummer was near to Carrie, and jealousy leaped alight in his bosom. In a flash of thought he reproached himself for having sent him back. Also, he hated him as an intruder. He could scarcely pull himself down to the level where he would have to congratulate Carrie as a friend. Nevertheless, the man mastered himself, and it was a triumph. He almost jerked the old subtle light to his eyes. "I thought," he said, looking at Carrie, "I'd come around and tell you how well you did, Mrs. Drouet. It was delightful." Carrie took the cue and replied, "Oh, thank you." "I was just telling her," put in Drouet, now delighted with his possession, "that I thought she did fine." "Indeed you did," said Hurstwood, turning upon Carrie eyes in which she read more than words. Carrie laughed luxuriantly. "If you do as well in the rest of the play, you'll make us all think you were a born actress." Carrie smiled again. She felt the acuteness of Hurstwood's position and wished deeply that she could be alone with him. But she did not understand the change in Drouet. Hurstwood found that he could not talk, repressed as he was, and grudging Drouet every moment of his presence, he bowed himself out with the elegance of a Faust. Outside he set his teeth in envy. "Damn it," he said, "is he always going to be in the way?" He was moody when he got back to the box, and could not talk for thinking of his wretched situation. As the curtain for the next act rose, Drouet came back. He was very much enlivened and tempered, inclined to whisper, but Hurstwood pretended interest. He fixed his eyes on the stage, although Carrie was not there. A short bit of melodramatic comedy preceding her entrance. He did not see what was going on, however. He was thinking his own thoughts, and they were wretched. The progress of the play did not improve matters for him. Carrie, from now on, was easily the center of interest. The audience, which had been inclined to feel that nothing could be good after that first gloomy impression, now went to the other extreme and saw power where it was not. The general feeling reacted on Carrie. She presented her part with some felicity, though nothing like the intensity which had aroused the feeling at the end of the long first act. Both Hurstwood and Drouet viewed her pretty figure with rising feelings. The fact that such ability should reveal itself in her, that she should set it forth under such effective circumstances, framed almost in massy gold and shone upon by the appropriate lights of sentiment and personality, heightened her charm for them. She was more than the old Carrie to Drouet. He longed to be at home with her until he could tell her. He waited impatiently the end, when they should go home alone. Hurstwood, on the contrary, saw in the strength of her new attractiveness his miserable predicament. He could have cursed the man beside him. By the Lord, he could not even applaud feelingly as he would. For once he must simulate when it left a taste in his mouth. It was in the last act, that Carrie's fascination for her lovers assumed its most effective character. Hurstwood listened to its progress, wondering when Carrie would come on. He had not long to wait. The author had used the artifice of sending all the merry company for a drive, and now Carrie came in alone. It was the first time that Hurstwood had had a chance to see her facing the audience quite alone, for nowhere else had she been without a foil of some sort. He suddenly felt, as she entered, that her old strength, the power that had grasped him at the end of the first act, had come back. She seemed to be gaining feeling now that the play was drawing to a close and the opportunity for great action was passing. "Poor Pearl," she said, speaking with natural pathos. "It is a sad thing to want for happiness, but it is a terrible thing to see another groping about blindly for it, when it is almost within the grasp." She was gazing now sadly out upon the open sea, her arm resting listlessly upon the polished doorpost. Hurstwood began to feel a deep sympathy for her and for himself. He could almost feel that she was talking to him. He was, by a combination of feelings and entanglements, almost deluded by that quality of voice and manner which, like a pathetic strain of music, seems ever a personal and intimate thing. Pathos has this quality, that it seems ever addressed to one alone. "And yet she can be very happy with him," went on the little actress. "Her sunny temper, her joyous face will brighten any home." She turned slowly toward the audience without seeing. There was so much simplicity in her movements that she seemed wholly alone. Then she found a seat by a table and turned over some books, devoting a thought to them. "With no longings for what I may not have," she breathed in conclusion, and it was almost a sigh. "My existence hidden from all, save two in the wide world, and making my joy out of the joy of that innocent girl who will soon be his wife." Hurstwood was sorry when a character known as Peach Blossom interrupted her. He stirred irritably, for he wished her to go on. He was charmed by the pale face, the lissome figure draped in pearl gray, with a coiled string of pearls at the throat. Carrie had the air of one who was weary and in need of protection, and under the fascinating make-believe of the moment, he rose in feeling until he was ready in spirit to go to her and ease her out of her misery by adding to his own delight. In a moment, Carrie was alone again, and was saying, with animation, "I must return to the city, no matter what dangers may lurk there. I must go, secretly if I can, openly if I must." There was a sound of horses' hooves outside, and then Ray's voice saying, "No, I shall not ride again. Put him up." He entered, and then began a scene which had as much to do with the creation of the tragedy of affection in Hurstwood as anything in his peculiar and involved career. For Carrie had resolved to make something of this scene, and now that the cue had come, it began to take a feeling hold upon her. Both Hurstwood and Drouet noted the rising sentiment as she proceeded. "I thought you had gone with Pearl," she said to her lover. "I did go part of the way, but I left the party a mile down the road." "You and Pearl had no disagreement?" "No, yes, that is, we always have. Our social barometers always stand at cloudy and overcast." "And whose fault is that?" she said easily. "Not mine," he answered pettishly. "I know, I do all I can. I say all I can. But she—" This was rather awkwardly put by Patton, but Carrie redeemed it with a grace which was inspiring. "But she is your wife," she said, fixing her whole attention upon the stilled actor, and softening the quality of her voice until it was again low and musical. "Ray, my friend, courtship is the text from which the whole sermon of married life takes its theme. Do not let yours be discontented and unhappy." She put her two little hands together and pressed them appealingly. Hurstwood gazed with slightly parted lips. Drouet was fidgeting with satisfaction. "To be my wife, yes," went on the actor in a manner which was weak by comparison, but which could not now spoil the tender atmosphere which Carrie had created and maintained. She did not seem to feel that he was wretched. She would have done nearly as well with a block of wood. The accessories she needed were within her own imagination. The acting of others could not affect them. "And you repent already?" she said slowly. "I lost you," he said, seizing her little hand, "and I was at the mercy of any flirt who chose to give me an inviting look. It was your fault. You know it was. You did it. Why did you leave me?" Carrie turned slowly away and seemed to be mastering some impulse in silence. Then she turned back. "Ray," she said, "the greatest happiness I've ever felt has been the thought that all your affection was forever bestowed upon a virtuous woman, your equal in family, fortune, and accomplishments. What a revelation do you make to me now? What is it makes you continually war with your own happiness?" The last thing was asked so simply that it came to the audience and the lover as a personal thing. At last it came to the part where the lover exclaimed, "Be to me as you used to be." Carrie answered with affecting sweetness, "I cannot be that to you, but I can speak in the spirit of Laura, who is dead to you forever." "Be it as you will," said Patton. Hurstwood leaned forward. The whole audience was silent and intent. "Let the woman you look upon be wise or vain," said Carrie, her eyes bent sadly upon the lover, who had sunk into a seat. "Beautiful or homely, rich or poor, she has but one thing she can really give or refuse, her heart." Drouet felt a scratch in his throat. "Her beauty, her wit, her accomplishments she may sell to you, but her love is the treasure without money and without price." The manager suffered this as a personal appeal. It came to him as if they were alone, and he could hardly restrain the tears for sorrow over the hopeless, pathetic, and yet dainty and appealing woman whom he loved. Drouet also was beside himself. He was resolving that he would be to Carrie what he had never been before. He would marry her, by George. She was worth it. "She only asks in return," said Carrie, scarcely hearing the small, scheduled reply of her lover, and putting herself even more in harmony with the plaintive melody now issuing from the orchestra, "that when you look upon her, your eyes shall speak devotion, that when you address her, your voice shall be gentle, loving, and kind, that you shall not despise her because she cannot understand all at once your vigorous thoughts and ambitious designs. For when misfortune and evil have defeated your greatest purposes, her love remains to console you. You look to the trees," she continued, while Hurstwood restrained his feelings only by the grimmest repression, "for strength and grandeur. Do not despise the flowers because their fragrance is all they have to give. Remember," she concluded tenderly, "love is all a woman has to give," and she laid a strange, sweet accent on the all. "But it is the only thing which God permits us to carry beyond the grave." The two men were in the most harrowed state of affection. They scarcely heard the few remaining words with which the scene concluded. They only saw their idol, moving about with appealing grace, continuing a power which to them was a revelation. Hurstwood resolved 1,000 things, Drouet as well. They joined equally in the burst of applause which called Carrie out. Drouet pounded his hands until they ached. Then he jumped up again and started out. As he went, Carrie came out, and seeing an immense basket of flowers being hurried down the aisle towards her, she waited. They were Hurstwood's. She looked towards the manager's box for a moment, caught his eye, and smiled. He could have leaped out of the box to enfold her. He forgot the need of circumspectness which his married state enforced. He almost forgot that he had with him in the box those who knew him. By the Lord, he would have that lovely girl if it took his all. He would act at once. This should be the end of Drouet, and don't you forget it. He would not wait another day. The drummer should not have her. He was so excited that he could not stay in the box. He went into the lobby and then into the street thinking. Drouet did not return. In a few minutes the last act was over, and he was crazy to have Carrie alone. He cursed the luck that could keep him smiling, bowing, shamming, when he wanted to tell her that he loved her, when he wanted to whisper to her alone. He groaned as he saw that his hopes were futile. He must even take her to supper, shamming. he finally went about and asked how she was getting along. The actors were all dressing, talking, hurrying about. Drouet was palavering himself with the looseness of excitement and passion. The manager mastered himself only by great effort. "We're doing supper, of course," he said, with a voice that was a mockery of his heart. "Oh, yes," said Carrie, smiling. The little actress was in fine feather. She was realizing now what it was to be petted. For once she was the admired, the sought after. The independence of success now made its first faint showing. With the tables turned, she was looking down rather than up to her lover. She did not fully realize that this was so, but there was something in condescension coming from her, which was infinitely sweet. When she was ready, they climbed into the waiting coach and drove downtown. Once only did she find an opportunity to express her feeling, and that was when the manager preceded Drouet in the coach and sat beside her. Before Drouet was fully in, she had squeezed Hurstwood's hand in a gentle, impulsive manner. The manager was beside himself with affection. He could have sold his soul to be with her alone. Ah, he thought, the agony of it. Drouet hung on, thinking he was all in all. The dinner was spoiled by his enthusiasm. Hurstwood went home feeling as if he should die if he did not find affectionate relief. He whispered, "Tomorrow," passionately to Carrie, and she understood. He walked away from the drummer and his prize at parting feeling as if he could slay him and not regret. Carrie also felt the misery of it. "Good night," he said, simulating an easy friendliness. "Good night," said the little actress tenderly. "The fool," he said, now hating Drouet. "The idiot. I'll do him yet, and that quick. We'll see tomorrow." "Well, if you aren't a wonder," Drouet was saying complacently, squeezing Carrie's arm, "you are the dandiest little girl on earth." End of chapter 19. Recording by Bob Sage. Chapter 20 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Sage. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 20. The Lure of the Spirit, the Flesh in Pursuit. Passion, in a man of Hurstwood's nature, takes a vigorous form. It is no musing, dreamy thing. There is none of the tendency to sing outside of Milady's window, to languish and repine in the face of difficulties. In the night, he was long getting to sleep because of too much thinking, and in the morning he was early awake, seizing with alacrity upon the same dear subject and pursuing it with vigor. He was out of sorts physically as well as disordered mentally, for did he not delight in a new manner in his Carrie? And was not Drouet in the way? Never was man more harassed than he by the thoughts of his love being held by the elated, flush-mannered drummer. He would have given anything, it seemed, to have the complication ended, to have Carrie acquiesce to an arrangement which would dispose of Drouet effectually and forever. What to do? He dressed thinking. He moved about in the same chamber with his wife, unmindful of her presence. At breakfast, he found himself without an appetite. The meat to which he helped himself remained on his plate untouched. His coffee grew cold, while he scanned the paper indifferently. Here and there he read a little thing, but remembered nothing. Jessica had not yet come down. His wife sat at one end of the table, revolving thoughts of her own in silence. A new servant had been recently installed and had forgot the napkins. On this account, the silence was irritably broken by a reproof. "I've told you about this, Maggie," said Mrs. Hurstwood. "I'm not going to tell you again." Hurstwood took a glance at his wife. She was frowning. Just now her manner irritated him excessively. Her next remark was addressed to him. "Have you made up your mind, George, when you will take your vacation?" It was customary for them to discuss the regular summer outing at this season of the year. "Not yet," he said. "I'm very busy just now." "Well, you'll want to make up your mind pretty soon, won't you, if we're going?" she returned. "I guess we have a few days yet," he said. "Humph," she returned. "Don't wait until the season's over." She stirred in aggravation as she said this. "There you go again," he observed. "One would think I never did anything the way you begin." "Well, I want to know about it," she reiterated. "You've got a few days," he insisted. "You'll not want to start before the races are over." He was irritated to think that this should come up when he wished to have his thoughts for other purposes.
"Well, we may. Jessica doesn't want to stay until the end of the races."
"What do you want with a season ticket, then?" "Ugh," she said, using the sound as an exclamation of disgust. "I'll not argue with you," and therewith arose to leave the table. "Say," he said, rising, putting a tone of determination in his voice, which caused her to delay her departure, "what's the matter with you of late? Can't I talk with you any more?" "Certainly you can talk to me," she replied, laying emphasis on the word. "Well, you wouldn't think so by the way you act. Now you want to know when I'll be ready. Not for a month yet. Maybe not then. We'll go without you." "You will, ah?" he sneered. "Yes, we will." He was astonished at the woman's determination, but it only irritated him more. "Well, we'll see about that. Seems to me you're trying to run things with a pretty high hand of late. You talk as though you settled my affairs for me. Well, you don't. You don't regulate anything that's connected with me. If you want to go, go, but you won't hurry me by any such talk as that." He was thoroughly aroused now. His dark eyes snapped, and he crunched his paper as he laid it down. Mrs. Hurstwood said nothing more. He was just finishing when she turned on her heel and went out into the hall and upstairs. He paused for a moment, as if hesitating, then sat down and drank a little coffee, and thereafter arose and went for his hat and gloves upon the main floor. His wife had really not anticipated a row of this character. She had come down to the breakfast table feeling a little out of sorts with herself, and revolving a scheme which she had in mind. Jessica had called her attention to the fact that the races were not what they were supposed to be. The social opportunities were not what they had thought they would be this year. The beautiful girl found going every day a dull thing. There was an earlier exodus this year of people who were anybody to the watering places and Europe. In her own circle of acquaintances, several young men in whom she was interested had gone to Waukesha. She began to feel that she would like to go too, and her mother agreed with her. Accordingly, Mrs. Hurstwood decided to broach the subject. She was thinking this over when she came down to the table, but for some reason the atmosphere was wrong. She was not sure, after it was all over, just how the trouble had begun. She was determined now, however, that her husband was a brute, and that under no circumstances would she let this go by unsettled. She would have a more ladylike treatment, or she would know why. For his part, the manager was loaded with the cares of this new argument until he reached his office and started from there to meet Carrie. Then the other complications of love, desire, and opposition possessed him. His thoughts fled on before him upon eagle's wings. He could hardly wait until he should meet Carrie face to face. What was the night, after all, without her? What the day? She must and should be his. For her part, Carrie had experienced a world of fancy and feelings since she had left him the night before. She had listened to Drouet's enthusiastic maunderings with much regard for that part which concerned herself, with very little for that which affected his own gain. She kept him at such length as she could, because her thoughts were with her own triumph. She felt Hurstwood's passion as a delightful background to her own achievement, and she wondered what he would have to say. She was sorry for him, too, with that peculiar sorrow which finds something complementary to itself in the misery of another. She was now experiencing the first shades of feeling of that subtle change which removes one out of the ranks of the suppliants into the lines of the dispensers of charity. She was, all in all, exceedingly happy. On the morrow, however, there was nothing in the papers concerning the event, and, in view of the flow of common, everyday things about it, it now lost a shade of the glow of the previous evening. Drouet himself was not talking so much of as for her. He felt instinctively that, for some reason or other, he needed reconstruction in her regard. "I think," he said, as he spruced around their chambers the next morning, preparatory to going downtown, "that I'll straighten out that little deal of mine this month, and then we'll get married. I was talking to Mosier about that yesterday." "No, you won't," said Carrie, who was coming to feel a certain faint power to jest with the drummer. "Yes, I will," he exclaimed, more feelingly than usual, adding with the tone of one who pleads, "Don't you believe what I've told you?" Carrie laughed a little. "Of course I do," she answered.
Drouet's assurance now misgave him.
Shallow as was his mental observation, there was that in the things which had happened which made his little power of analysis useless. Carrie was still with him, but not helpless and pleading. There was a lilt in her voice which was new. She did not study him with eyes expressive of dependence. The drummer was feeling the shadow of something which was coming. It colored his feelings and made him develop those little attentions and say those little words which were mere forfendations against danger. Shortly after he departed, and Carrie prepared for her meeting with Hurstwood, she hurried to her toilet, which was soon made, and hastened down the stairs. At the corner she passed Drouet, but they did not see each other. The drummer had forgotten some bills which he wished to turn into his house. He hastened up the stairs and burst into the room, but found only the chambermaid, who was cleaning up. "Hello," he exclaimed, half to himself. "Has Carrie gone?" "Your wife? Yes, she went out a few minutes ago." "That's strange," thought Drouet. "She didn't say a word to me. I wonder where she went." He hastened about, rummaging in his valise for what he wanted and finally pocketing it. Then he turned his attention to his fair neighbor, who was good-looking and kindly disposed towards him. "What are you up to?" he said, smiling. "Just cleaning," she replied, stopping and winding a dusting towel about her hand. "Tired of it?" "Not so very." "Let me show you something," he said affably, coming over, and taking out of his pocket a little lithographed card which had been issued by a wholesale tobacco company. On this was printed a picture of a pretty girl holding a striped parasol, the colors of which would be changed by means of a revolving disc in the back, which showed red, yellow, green, and blue through the little interstices made in the ground occupied by the umbrella top. "Isn't that clever?" he said, handing it to her and showing her how it worked. "You never saw anything like that before." "Isn't it nice?" she answered. "You can have it if you want it," he remarked. "That's a pretty ring you have," he said, touching a commonplace setting which adorned the hand holding the card he had given her. "Do you think so?" "That's right," he answered, making use of a pretense at examination to secure her finger. "That's fine." The ice being thus broken, he launched into further observation, pretending to forget that her fingers were still retained by his. She soon withdrew them, however, and retreated a few feet to rest against the window-sill. "I didn't see you for a long time," she said coquettishly, repulsing one of his exuberant approaches. "You must have been away." "I was," said Drouet. "Do you travel far?" "Pretty far, yes." "Do you like it?" "Oh, not very well. You get tired of it after a while." "I wish I could travel," said the girl, gazing idly out of the window. "What has become of your friend Hurstwood?" she suddenly asked, bethinking herself of the manager, who from her own observation seemed to contain promising material. "He's here in town." "What makes you ask about him?" "Oh, nothing, only he hasn't been here since you got back." "How do you come to know him?" "Didn't I take up his name a dozen times in the last month?" "Get out," said the drummer lightly. "He hasn't called more than half a dozen times since we've been here." "He hasn't, hey?" said the girl, smiling. "That's all you know about it." Drouet took on a slightly more serious tone. He was uncertain as to whether she was joking or not. "Tease," he said. "What makes you smile that way?" "Oh, nothing." "Have you seen him recently?" "Not since you came back," she laughed. "Before?" "Certainly." "How often?" "Why, nearly every day." She was a mischievous newsmonger, and was keenly wondering what the effects of her words would be.
Who did he come to see? Asked the drummer incredulously. Mrs. Drouet. He looked rather foolish at this answer, and then attempted to correct himself so as not to appear a dupe. Well, he said, what of it? Nothing, replied the girl, her head cocked coquettishly to one side. He's an old friend, he went on, getting deeper into the mire. He would have gone further with his little flirtation, but the taste for it was temporarily removed. He was quite relieved when the girl's name was called from below. I've got to go, she said, moving away from him airily. I'll see you later, he said, with a pretense of disturbance at being interrupted. When she was gone, he gave freer play to his feelings. His face, never easily controlled by him, expressed all the perplexity and disturbance which he felt. Could it be that Carrie had received so many visits and yet said nothing about them? Was Hurstwood lying? What did the chambermaid mean by it, anyway? He had thoughts there was something odd about Carrie's manner at the time. Why did she look so disturbed when he asked her how many times Hurstwood had called? By George, he remembered now. There was something strange about the whole thing. He sat down in a rocking chair to think the better, drawing up one leg on his knee and frowning mightily. His mind ran on at a great rate. And yet Carrie hadn't acted out of the ordinary. It couldn't be, by George, that she was deceiving him. She hadn't acted that way. Why, even last night she had been as friendly toward him as could be, and Hurstwood too. Look how they acted. He could hardly believe they would try to deceive him. His thoughts burst into words. She did act sort of funny at times. Here she had dressed and gone out this morning and never said a word. He scratched his head and prepared to go downtown. He was still frowning. As he came into the hall, he encountered the girl, who was now looking after another chamber. She had a white dusting cap on, beneath which her chubby face shone good-naturedly. Drouet almost forgot his worry in the fact that she was smiling on him. He put his hand familiarly on her shoulder, as if only to greet her in passing. "Got over being mad?" she said, still mischievously inclined. "I'm not mad," he answered. "I thought you were," she said, smiling. "Quit your fooling around," he said in an offhand way. "Were you serious?" "Certainly," she answered. Then, with an air of one who did not intentionally mean to create trouble, "He came lots of times. I thought you knew." The game of deception was up with Drouet. He did not try to simulate indifference further. "Did he spend evenings here?" he asked. "Sometimes. Sometimes they went out." "In the evening?" "Yes." "You mustn't look so mad, though." "I'm not," he said. "Did anyone else see him?" "Of course," said the girl, as if, after all, it were nothing in particular. "How long ago was this?" "Just before you came back." The drummer pinched his lip nervously. "Don't say anything, will you?" he asked, giving the girl's arm a gentle squeeze. "Certainly not," she returned. "I wouldn't worry over it." "All right," he said, passing on, seriously brooding for once, and yet not wholly unconscious of the fact that he was making a most excellent impression on the chambermaid. "I'll see her about that," he said to himself passionately, feeling that he had been unduly wronged. "I'll find out, by George, whether she'll act that way or not." End of chapter 20. Recording by Bob Sage.
Chapter 21 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Sage. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 21. The Lure of the Spirit. The Flesh in Pursuit. When Carrie came, Hurstwood had been waiting many minutes. His blood was warm, his nerves wrought up. He was anxious to see the woman who had stirred him so profoundly the night before. "Here you are," he said, repressedly, feeling a spring in his limbs and an elation which was tragic in itself. "Yes," said Carrie. They walked on, as if bound for some objective point, while Hurstwood drank in the radiance of her presence. The rustle of her pretty skirt was like music to him. "Are you satisfied?" he asked, thinking of how well she did the night before? Are you? He tightened his fingers as he saw the smile she gave him. It was wonderful. Carrie laughed ecstatically. That was one of the best things I've seen in a long time, he added. He was dwelling on her attractiveness, as he had felt it the evening before, and mingling it with feeling her presence, inspired now. Carrie was dwelling in the atmosphere which this man created for her. Already she was enlivened and suffused with a glow. She felt his drawing toward her in every sound of his voice. "Those were such nice flowers you sent me," she said after a moment or two. "They were beautiful." "Glad you liked them," he answered simply. He was thinking all the time that the subject of his desire was being delayed. He was anxious to turn the talk to his own feelings. All was ripe for it. His Carrie was beside him. He wanted to plunge in and expostulate with her, and yet he found himself fishing for words and feeling for a way. "You got home all right?" he said gloomily of a sudden, his tone modifying itself to one of self-commiseration. "Yes," said Carrie easily. He looked at her steadily for a moment, slowing his pace and fixing her with his eyes. She felt the flood of feeling. "How about me?" he asked. This confused Carrie considerably, for she realized the floodgates were open. She didn't know exactly what to answer. "I don't know," she answered. He took his lower lip between his teeth for a moment and then let it go. He stopped by the walk-side and kicked the grass with his toe. He searched her face with a tender, appealing glance. "Won't you come away with me?" he asked intensely. "I don't know," returned Carrie, still illogically drifting and finding nothing at which to catch. As a matter of fact, she was in a most hopeless quandary. Here was a man whom she thoroughly liked, who exercised an influence over her, sufficient almost to delude her into the belief that she was possessed of a lively passion for him. She was still the victim of his keen eyes, his suave manners, his fine clothes. She looked and saw before her a man who was most gracious and sympathetic, who leaned toward her with a feeling that was a delight to observe. She could not resist the glow of his temperament, the light of his eye. She could hardly keep from feeling what she felt. And yet she was not without thoughts which were disturbing. What did he know? What had Drouet told him? Was she a wife in his eyes, or what? Would he marry her? Even while he talked, and she softened, and her eyes were lighted with a tender glow, she was asking herself if Drouet had told him they were not married. There was never anything at all convincing about what Drouet said. And yet she was not grieved at Hurstwood's love. No strain of bitterness was in it for her, whatever he knew. He was evidently sincere. His passion was real and warm. There was power in what he said. What should she do? She went on thinking this, answering vaguely, languishing affectionately, and altogether drifting, until she was on a borderless sea of speculation. "Why don't you come away?" he said tenderly. "I will arrange for you whatever." "Oh, don't," said Carrie. "Don't what?" he asked. "What do you mean?" There was a look of confusion and pain in her face. She was wondering why that miserable thought must be brought in. She was struck as by a blade with the miserable provision which was outside the pale of marriage. He himself realized that it was a wretched thing to have dragged in. He wanted to weigh the effects of it, and yet he could not see. He went on beating, flushed by her presence, clearly awakened, intensely enlisted in his plan. "Won't you come?" he said, beginning over and with more reverent feeling. "You know I can't do without you. You know it. It can't go on this way, can it?" "I know," said Carrie. "I wouldn't ask if I wouldn't argue with you if I could help it. Look at me, Carrie. Put yourself in my place. You don't want to stay away from me, do you?" She shook her head as if in deep thought. "Then why not settle the whole thing, once and for all?" "I don't know," said Carrie. "Don't know? Ah, Carrie, what makes you say that? Don't torment me. Be serious." "I am."
said Carrie softly. "You can't be, dearest, and say that. Not when you know I love you. Look at last night." His manner as he said this was the most quiet imaginable. His face and body retained utter composure. Only his eyes moved, and they flashed a subtle, dissolving fire. In them, the whole intensity of the man's nature was distilling itself. Carrie made no answer. "How can you act this way, dearest?" he inquired after a time. "You love me, don't you?" He turned on her such a storm of feeling that she was overwhelmed. For the moment all doubts were cleared away. "Yes," she answered, frankly and tenderly. "Well, then you'll come, won't you? Come tonight." Carrie shook her head in spite of her distress. "I can't wait any longer," urged Hurstwood. "If that is too soon, come Saturday." "When will we be married?" she asked, diffidently, forgetting in her difficult situation that she had hoped he took her to be Drouet's wife. The manager started, hit as he was by a problem which was more difficult than hers. He gave no sign of the thoughts that flashed like messages to his mind. "Any time you say," he said, with ease, refusing to discolor his present delight with this miserable problem. "Saturday?" asked Carrie. He nodded his head. "Well, if you will marry me then," she said, "I'll go." The manager looked at his lovely prize, so beautiful, so winsome, so difficult to be won, and made strange resolutions. His passion had gotten to that stage now, where it was no longer colored with reason. He did not trouble over little barriers of this sort in the face of so much loveliness. He would accept the situation with all its difficulties. He would not try to answer the objections which cold truth thrust upon him. He would promise anything, everything, and trust to fortune to disentangle him. He would make a try for paradise, whatever might be the result. He would be happy by the Lord if it cost all honesty of statement, all abandonment of truth. Carrie looked at him tenderly. She could have laid her head upon his shoulder, so delightful did it all seem. "Well," she said, "I'll try and get ready then." Hurstwood looked into her pretty face, crossed with the little shadows of wonder and misgiving, and thought he had never seen anything more lovely. "I'll see you again tomorrow," he said joyously, "and we'll talk over our plans." He walked on with her, elated beyond words. So delightful had been the result, he impressed a long story of joy and affection upon her, though there was but here and there a word. After a half-hour, he began to realize that the meeting must come to an end. So exacting is the world. "Tomorrow," he said at parting, a gaiety of manner adding wonderfully to his brave demeanor. "Yes," said Carrie, tripping elatedly away. There had been so much enthusiasm engendered that she was believing herself deeply in love. She sighed as she thought of her handsome adorer. She would get ready by Saturday. She would go, and they would be happy. End of chapter 21. Recording by Bob Sage.